All right. Welcome, everybody. All one viewer that we have. It'll get better, RJ, I promise. It'll get better.
We have to start the stream before people can hop on, Mark.
That's true, too. That's true. I know Adam's out there watching. That's
You
all.
got to open the door before you
That's all
can
that,
start welcoming people in.
That's all that really matters. Adam's out there somewhere watching us, I'm sure. I didn't even open all the stupid things and hit all the likes and all that. Yeah, everything is last minute today. I was originally going to put out a recorded video that I have planned, but obviously this was more important and more interesting, I think. And this is centered around the trip that I had. I went on vacation. It's gone for like a week. it was good. It was fun. Went to visit some relatives down in Arizona, actually, and see some petroglyphs and some pictographs, which is always a good thing. And decided, because flights were cheaper and I hadn't done it, that it would be cool to go to Vegas. Because I'd never been to Vegas, and I was wanted to go to Vegas, and I was wanted to see the Hoover Dam, and so that opportunity sort of came up. And the interesting thing about that was, because that opportunity sort of arose and I got to actually see Vegas, I feel like I had some insights there, right? And those insights were around this larger issue around like hospitality. What is hospitality? What does this mean? What does it mean to have a hospitality industry, right? Or a profession? Like, what profession are you? Oh, what do you do for work? I'm in hospitality. It's like, what a weird way to to talk about the world, right? Like, what does that mean? What is this? What are we talking about when we're talking about hospitality? Like, how does all this sort of work out, right? So I thought it would be good to do a stream on hospitality, and then I was talking with you and Castle and Adam eventually too showed up about this issue. So we took some notes, decided to do it as a live stream, because I'm always better with help. We'll say I need a lot of help. So I'm glad you're here, RJ. Thank you for joining me. What are your sort of initial thoughts, like when you heard all this, and where do you want to go with this? And then I'll do the opening about the larger frame, and we can hopefully reframe it for people.
Well, I think my intention, as far as some of my thoughts are coming from, are thinking about the business aspect of Vegas, especially if it's the hospitality industry, and that can mean a lot of things, like you were gesturing at. It could be anybody between the janitor and the guy who checks you in, to pretty much anybody and everybody else who was there, except for probably the musicians and the actual performers themselves, even though that's probably still going to be wrapped under the umbrella of hospitality as entertainment that your host is sharing with you. So thinking about kind of how Vegas has evolved over the years and what it offers to people, and what they expect to get out of what they're going there, and then thinking about some of what the current moment and attitudes about ourselves affect that. So maybe some thoughts about, are you expecting authentic interaction when you go to Vegas? Are you expecting performativity? Are you expecting like what are those expectations? How are they not normal? How is that changed, if it's changed? That's kind of what's going on in my
mind. Okay. Well, I just want to do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares. Apparently Hebrews 13:2, whatever that is. That's from some book I'm sure I didn't read.
I think I read the first half.
I read the first. That's good. Yeah, I mean, so the thing for me, and we do have a bunch of notes, maybe not as many as we'd like, but the thing for me was, I was thinking about this, and I've thought about this before, but I've never been to Vegas, so I don't like to talk about things I have zero experience with. And until I went to Vegas, I didn't have the confirmation that I wanted to talk about this in a larger form. And so I, certainly not publicly. So I've never discussed it publicly before, but I was wondering, like, when you have a society and you have this a profession of hospitality, right? Around this hospitality industry now, what does that mean, in terms of Las Vegas, right? So I want to take the idea that hospitality is a real thing, that it's a real industry, that it's a real profession, and say, what happened that we had a switch, we'll say, from this idea of hospitality as part of a hospital, right, which takes care of sick people, or as we're going to see, it was actually even older than that, to entertainment and hedonism, right? Because that's really what I think what Vegas is exemplifying, is this swap over of this concept of hospitality has been sort of hijacked and taken out of where it originated and placed into entertainment and hedonism, which is, I mean, if that's not what Vegas is, then you're probably wrong about everything you see in the world. Like, I don't even know what this, like,
maybe not everything.
No question about it. Right? It's all gambling and whorehouses and.
Well, the word I was going to use is transactional.
Well, we'll get into that. I think that plays into the sort of the if you will, the evolution of what's actually happening here. Is that things, we'll say more broadly, have become transactional, and that allows us to sort of move this idea of hospitality out of where it belongs, corrupt it, and use it for less than good ends. And the reason why I say that is because of the following. The word hospitality has its origins in the Old French hospital with no H, meaning hostel or shelter for the needy. It comes from the Latin hospitale, which is derived from the Latin adjective hospitalis, meaning of a guest or host, right? And so, and apparently that term persists in modern French as hôpital. My French is terrible, so we'll just go with that. So you can see the way in which it was done, and then what our good friend Ludwig York actually pointed out to us is that, in fact, in the old days, if you couldn't find a place of lodging with somebody you knew, like in a village, you would rely on the local inn. If that didn't work, you'd probably rely on the monastery, and then you'd go to the hospital, right? Which is a hostel, which is a place where you take in a guest, as some form of host. And I also, just before I let you you in on this, I just want to point out too that I think this is wrapped up in politeness, and our lack of politeness and etiquette, our loss of those things, as we'll say, sacred things, because the sacredness of engaging with somebody as a guest in your home, in your city, whatever it is, in your village, it doesn't even matter, right? Like, new people are supposed to be treated with reverence because of the, we'll say, the potential that they bring. And I think that's actually fantastically important. But what do you have to sort of add to that?
Well, I think your point about it being moved from its original context is an important one. It's not unique to this particular this case. Time moves on and changes all things, so you have to expect some changes. But the key thing here that I alluded to before is really how it's become from a personal experience, and that's something where you can respect things and treat them as sacred, or you can disrespect them, has been removed from the context of being hosted or interacting with the hospitality industry itself. And these days you're interacting with very few people, if any. It wasn't so long ago that my grandparents tell me that you had to have a travel agent. And, I'm assuming maybe a few of the agents knew each other. Maybe that's how some things were coordinated. But these days, you find the best deal, then you show up, show them your phone, you get your key card to your room. You get the amenities that you pay for,
Right.
and it's not a place to meet people. There's a lot of turnover amongst the folks who work there. So the building is more of what's hosting you than the people who are actually inside the building. And that's a major difference. And some recent scholarship talks about how marketing and aesthetics is keying in on that from a consumer side and a marketing side of the equation.
Well, that's an interesting frame. I hadn't thought of that. We hadn't really discussed that before. So this is great. This is perfect. This is perfect exploration. Yeah, I mean, I think I want to say divide and conquer is a thing. And if you wanted to put this in a war frame, which everybody seems to want to do, although there's kind of two sides to the war frame, right? There's I'm going to call it the crazy Christian side, because it is crazy, where they're like, everything is spiritual warfare, right? And I want to say, well, yes, but right to the other side, which is the Eric Weinstein. If you haven't seen my video on Eric Weinstein and his crazy war talk, he's not the only one, right? Even Tim Pool has fallen prey to this because the leftists are warring with one another, and so they think that's everybody because they think everybody's a leftist. But I think that
in America, Mark. But let's stay on the topic.
Well, I don't think so, but maybe, hopefully there are non-leftists outside of America. But
I just object to the French tennis court framing of politics in general. But
yeah,
well, going back to the point,
most people are still moderates, right? There's still 3 buckets. I'm a big 3 bucket guy, but I think that if you think of things in terms of warfare and divide and conquer, and I think that's fair enough, because it really doesn't matter if you're, we'll say, in the religious camp or not in the religious camp. The war talk is a valid talk. It's just, if you think it's materialistic, like Eric Weinstein does, you're nuts. Like, that's just observably false. Like, there aren't people dying all over the place, we'll say, in the places that people think the quote culture war or whatever's going on. That's not happening, right? But if you look at it in terms of a war, we'll say, against our passions, or a war fighting hedonism, right? I think those are valid ways to think about it. If you think about it that way, there's a divide and conquer strategy. And because we're all trying to be individuals, right, successfully divided, right, we're unable to fight the sway of marketing, right? The people that I know that will say, still engage with Disney World even, or, go on these big trips, and they still use travel agents, actually, interestingly enough, right? They don't try to plan it themselves. So they still engage with the same sorts of things that we'll say I engage with as a quote individual or something, although I don't do that. But they don't feel the same pull because they're not prone to the marketing. They see it clearly and they go, man, that's a tourist trap. We're not doing that, right? Or they go, we know it's a tourist trap, but like, this is what we saved our money for 3 years for, right? Like they have a very healthy relationship with those things that people regularly say are unhealthy, right? And so I think that's a very different attitude, and that's because they understand the warfare, at least unconsciously, and they have protections against it, right? They're not going to fall for this to any great extent. And if you ever go to like Hawaii, there's a Mormon place that does, it is totally run by the Mormons. It's hysterical, but it does the classic, Hawaiian show and meal thing. But it's unbelievable. Like, you have to walk through the gift center to get out, and it's a huge gift center store. And
so that's another good example of that transactional version of what you would expect when you're being hosted. Some sort of exchange, the personal feeling of being in there. I think maybe you want to jump into some of the examples at that point.
Yeah, but we've been hijacked and the whole thing's been reversed, to some extent, right? Because the hospitality is something that's given to the guest, and buying something from the gift shop is the exact opposite. But you're being given a simulacra of hospitality by being given the show that you paid for. And it's like, wait a minute, what? Because in Hawaii, you wouldn't have paid for it.
Mhm.
You would have landed on the shore and been given a show and given gifts. And right, it was a great gift that you were there, sort of a thing. And so it's a total reversal. And we don't even know that it's a total reversal because because it's not a normal battle, and people talk about fifth generation war, whatever. None of those people know what they're talking about. I'll just tell you right now. None of them understand what they're talking about. Their framing is very materialistic. That's why I kind of side on the spiritual warfare side. There's something, we'll say, non-material driving all this, this idea of hedonism. And then in the old days, because visitors were treated well and sacred, because they were basically on their own, right? They were in the middle of some form of domicile, like of temporary domicile, being away from home. That is why they were treated well, because they're more vulnerable. Whereas when we're all individuals, we're really vulnerable to this marketing thing, and this marketing thing is being used against us, right? Where it doesn't have to be. And yeah, we talked about sort of the transactional nature of things, and I've got my own sort of thoughts on where that comes from, because I think that's actually really important, right? That's part of the materialism. It's not sort of all of it, but I want to read this. The problem with war framing is that if you listen to military people, very little time spent at war for people on the ground is spent fighting. Exactly.
90% logistics.
Right.
Which, funnily enough, so is Vegas. But
right. Well, and that it is that that materialization or material manifestation of these sacred things that is embodied with something like gambling, right? And we'll say there's healthy gambling and unhealthy gambling. And I don't mean whether or not you're quote a gambler and you lose it all, or right. I mean more like
risk taking,
but also what you're taking risks with, right? Because it's and some people are more prone to that, right? I'm a low risk person, right? I'm basically don't take a lot of chances where the odds are that I'll lose a lot. I take a lot of chances, but the downside's very small, which is something that Nassim Taleb, of course, talks about. You should read all his books because he's excellent at this. But because we've framed things in our heads as material, we're more prone to transactional ways of relationship. We're more prone to proceduralizing things that basically aren't procedures. Like being hospitable to somebody or being polite to somebody or proper etiquette, those aren't procedures. They're not proceduralizable, right? And I think that's sort of where you wanted to go. It's part of the flattening of the world, right? Because as an individual, you can understand a procedure, but it's way harder as an individual to understand a set of relationships that you have with a bunch of people, especially a set of relationships that you should have with strangers that you can agree on without knowing them.
And I'll give you a second example that isn't specific to Vegas, but I'm sure folks out there probably may have used it themselves, which is that using Airbnb. If especially if the host is, quote unquote host is home, right. That's going to be hit or miss. But what I want to bring in here is that as opposed to actually couch surfing among your friends, right. which is going to involve a certain degree of giving back to them, exchange, interpersonal relationship. You're kind of winning points with each other, for lack of a better term, when you do that in a way that you're not when you're just showing up at this hotel that has an aesthetic designed to capture your attention and appeal just to you, and it's not not exactly family friendly. Some of them are now. Some of them are
Yeah.
amusements.
Right.
But pointing back at what's being projected onto the space, what should be with what's going on amongst the people itself.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point, right? Like we have this sort of mode of engagement that is centered around, we'll say, our personal experience. And it's not centered around communion, which is, right, which is, and I don't know which came first, right? I don't, right? Because they have that whole thing about what, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas sort of thing. And it's like, what is that about? Like, sort of like this place you can escape to, right? Do the hedonistic thing, and then no one's going to know. No one's going to find out because no one's going to tell, even though everyone's there. It's like, how does that work? Right? As if it's this neutral space that you can enter into and then have this wonderful experience apart from the rest of your life, and it just doesn't impact anything else. And just it's a very scientific way of viewing the world. Like, Vegas is this place apart. It's off in the desert, right? And boy, is it off in the desert. It's wild. And there's all these flashy lights, so everything's sort of attention and attraction, right? But then when you go home, you're home. Like, it's not a big deal. I don't think that you can do that. Like, I don't think you can go somewhere and not take it back with you, right? Or take something back with you from your experience. I don't think that's how the world works at all, actually. I think that's quite
Other than exhaustion, you're definitely going to take something back with you when you've been really overloaded with all that sensory input. And that's where Vegas still excels, which is it's hosting your senses. There's everything you can eat, everything to see, anything to listen to. If you have enough money, I'm sure there's other options. I don't have money, so I don't know what those are. But it basically scales infinitely upward towards the hedonistic parallax, if that even exists. And that is not hosting. That's being a place to hold something, which is, again, really removes that human element out of things. And it's also, rather than to be a place that you're holding together to bring things together, you're holding them together towards extraction. The whole thing is designed to extract something out of the visitor, not protect the visitor or give the visitor something. Whether or not back in the day it was protecting them from certain elements of other parts of life or offering them shelter from that. And, that's a different conversation. But these days with the mega corporations, it's certainly not aimed at the individual as an individual. It's aimed at large volumes of people.
Yeah, well, then that's a good point. That was one thing I was thinking of. So we stayed, and again, this trip wasn't about Vegas, so I was only there for like 3 days. And then we went into Red Rock Canyon in outside of Sedona, Arizona, right? To see the heritage sites there, Palaki and Hananki and Crane and all these sites with petroglyphs and petrographs, right? This stark difference between old Vegas and new Vegas, because we did both, it really highlighted stuff for me. Like, old Vegas was centered around a certain level of scale where there might have been some actual hospitality, because the mobsters that ran the place, that built the place, right, they were concerned with that. Like, they were old world with the old culture thought, right from Italy and Sicily, right? Attitude about this, about this thing, but also they thrived on ego. Like, ego was their big thing, and they were happy to make some money and not all the money. Like, they didn't need to fleece people. They just needed people to have a good time, because if people were having a good time, they felt like they were doing a good thing. which might be in contrast to their other work back in Jersey or New York or Boston or wherever, right? Like where
They just painted
maybe
houses, man, and did rugging.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I don't know what you're talking about. It was a tax that they got. It was taxes. All right, they just didn't pay the
It,
taxes.
he's in trash removal, right, right, yeah, and so I think that was a real thing for them. But then what happens is these big corporations move in, and the motivation of the big corporation is not um, it is not the same, right? They're very transactional, and that transaction is dollars, and they see a way to kind of fleece people. Whereas in old Vegas, you very much get the impression that they wanted more people to win more money, both, right? They wanted more big winners, and not just because it attracted people. That may be what they said even, but because they wanted people to feel that way, right? They actually genuinely wanted people, interacting in that way. I like, yeah, Don, waste management. Thank you. I couldn't remember the term. So I was watching a Sopranos documentary on the flight in too, which is just hysterical. But I think the big corporations, to your transactional point, they're purely transactional. Like you're just a number, right? And
Go back to what you said about Hawaii. There's the welcome has become a branding touch point, and the threshold is
right.
Is now the place where you're in marketing terms, you got to get the prospective consumer over the threshold into the decision making space, and all of these terms for the home, for being hospitable, because we could have an entire conversation about just what a threshold is back in the day.
Right.
We still have a lot of superstitious practices that reflect this. But
right.
Getting back to my point, and I'm thinking of some work by George McCracken, which is that there's essentially a repackaging of symbols of warmth and into tools of brand performance, whether that's performing and rather than actually being kind to a customer if you're a waiter or waitress somewhere in Vegas,
Right.
or all the way up to the hospitality agents who I hear butler people are around. So I'll get your ideas on that.
Yeah, I think again, I mean, when you flatten the world down to propositions and procedures, if you want to throw it in the quote 4 Ps, which of course I do. Of course, I want to throw out my 4 Ps and not John's, because John's are not correct, as we've pretty much proven. I think that's a flattening of the world, right? That is, in our model, you can kind of see it. Like if you flatten the world and you just understand it in terms of propositions and procedures, it's a very video game-like thing. See my video game video. I'll have another one soon on video game reality. It looks like a video game. It looks transactional. Video games are purely transactional, right? And even when you try to add in the multi-online stuff, right, where you have many players, it's still transactional, right? And transaction is still at the heart of the game. And sort of Vegas did it first, right? And what is Vegas? Vegas is the gaming capital of the world. Right? And so the video games in many ways are copying that model because it's transactional and flat. And that is the problem, is that you've taken these rituals, these sacred rituals of politeness, etiquette, and interaction, relational things, and you flatten them into procedural things. You swap ritual for procedure, which ritual is not a procedure, right? The fact that you can map the two is not a plus; it's just a fact. And now you have a situation where, again, it's divide and conquer. From the individual perspective, I can't understand. Well, I'll give you the classic example. So, I have a friend, a good friend of mine, and he's Orthodox Jewish, right? and he lives up in Boston. Actually, he lives on a street I used to live on when I was young, and in Brighton. And one day he invited me over for lunch because I had been down in South Carolina for at least a couple of years, and I was coming back up. And he said, "Oh, we should have lunch." So I went over to his house for lunch, and he said, "You don't have to do this, but I have to do this thing before we eat. But you're welcome to participate." Now, I'm RJ. I'm not Jewish. I don't, not even close, right? So I participated.
It's not too late. It's not too late.
Thanks. You're not supposed to do that. I know that much. But I participated in the ritual. I don't understand anything about the ritual. And to this day, I really don't understand. There was hand washing and towel. I couldn't even describe it to you because I don't remember it. You know it better than I do because I know you've done it more than
I'll just describe it as orientation setting before a meal.
Right. And ritualistic hand cleaning and, things like that and whatever. Mm-hmm. And I did it, right? I just followed what he did, which is what he told me to do. Like, I'm stupid, so that's the best I can do, right? But the thing was, like, that was important. It wasn't important to our lunch. It was also important to our lunch, right? But it was important to the experience of being allowed in his home and participating, with his family, basically. I was just him and his wife. And she absolutely loves me, by the way, but that's a different story. I'll tell you that story someday on the Discord. It's very funny. So reducing that to a procedure and saying, oh, this is the procedure for Jewish people sharing a meal with an outsider or whatever. That doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't work like that, right?
Right. It doesn't make any sense. And it doesn't function in the same way. And that's why this hospitality idea is so important, right? Because when you remove hospitality as a sacred set of rituals for guests that teach hosts and guests how to interact on a higher level, that third thing I keep talking about to some extent, in the vertical causality zone, which is why none of these people are talking about it. And they use a dopey term like vertical causality, which I don't even disagree with. It's just so empty and devoid of helpfulness.
Like, if you don't like the language, man, we could switch to French.
No, we can't. I hate French. I hate French more. I mean, that's part of the issue, is that you squish everything into propositions and procedures and you wreck the world. You just flatten it down. And because the world is flat, everyone's equal. And then everyone's an individual. And it's like, okay, we're all equal. We're all individuals. There's the divide and conquer. Like, you want equality? Are you sure? Because now you're a victim. And I think the victim culture thing, like, they do have a point. It's just not the point that everybody thinks it is. You are a victim of trying to be equal and trying to be an individual. That's what you're a victim of. You did that to yourself, by the way. No one did that to you, because I'm not a victim of that. Not that I maybe wasn't, right? But I'm not right now. And I did want to highlight this. Ixnad, this can probably be tracked to Napoleon being an inhospitable emperor. Don't even get me started on the problems with Napoleon and the fact that he's not an emperor, tried to be, because there's no such thing as an emperor. That doesn't even make any sense. And you have many titles if you rule over many lands. And if you don't have many titles when you rule over many lands, that's a flattening, a reduction that destroys the world. Napoleon, anyone? Adam and I went over that in one of our history videos. So talking about the French Revolution, right? How Napoleon pretty much wrecked everything with that move. And yeah, it's part of that. And I think, so for me, when I talk about history, well, yes, the correct answer is everything went bad when they beheaded the English king. Very much so. And we sort of touch on that in history talks. The part where it's visible is the French Revolution. And the thing that gets everybody out of the French Revolution, to be perfectly fair to the French Revolution, not that you can be perfectly fair to the French Revolution, because no good came of it. And everything that came out of it is completely corrupt, like feminism. See My Patriarchy is Good video with Adam and Father Eric. That materialism, that structure, that recapitulation to the idea that there is a quote redeeming quality to materializing the world and measuring it and treating it as though it's a bunch of parts that can be dealt with, we'll say, individually, which is very much what, because Napoleon is a precision cannoneer, right? Like, this is the dawn of ballistics. It's the dawn of being able to say, if you put the cannon at this height and you have this much powder, you can hit right exactly there on the field below you. Like, that was never possible before basically that era, or error, as the case may be in this case. And that's actually significant, because that's when things start to get proceduralized. That's when things start to, right? So you hear people talk about modernity, right? And I say, no. What you're describing is materialism, not modernity. Modernity doesn't make any sense. See my video on modernity on navigating patterns. I'll fix it for you there. I'll prove my case, right? And the age of gnosis, right? Because the two are tied together. This idea that you can understand the world as a series of propositions, and that's the best way to understand the world. That's part of the age of gnosis. So, the world is just knowledge, or understandable by, quote, knowledge, and knowledge is really just words at the end of the day. And then words become magical, because words are used in magic, yes, but they are not in and of themselves magic. And people are very confused by that, right? But when you engage with this, you find out, oh, that's where the flattening starts. Like, that's what, and it's Napoleon that leads up to the Great War in 2 acts, because there's no such thing as World War II. Napoleon does that. Like, that's where it starts. It doesn't start with the Great War. It starts with the treaties to try to get around the problem of Napoleon. And then the legalism and the interpretation of those treaties. And then that's when you start to see this idea eventually sort of leach out. This hospitality goes away from the hospitals, which were the place of last refuge for people who didn't have another place to stay, right? Or people who were sick and couldn't stay anywhere else, into this land where now hospitality is being used for entertainment and sin. Yeah.
So I think, coming back around from where you were coming there, Napoleon and social changes aside, I think what's going on with Vegas to a certain degree is we're seeing what happens when care is stripped out of the interaction.
Right.
And that, when you can't care about something, or when you don't care about something, or you don't have the opportunity to care about something, the signals get very confused, actually, very quickly. It's not just an increase in noise, although it does that, but it actually does confuse parts of the signal and, of course, the reception, which makes it easier to, put something else in your face, and you're going to grab onto that. But that's not really the point that I'm making. When you divorce the care from the transactional, or from the transaction itself, you now only really yourself care about the quality of the thing that you're buying, the bang for your buck. And so what ends up being sold at the place that's hospitality is, how much can you buy for whatever experience or for whatever indulgence, that you doing that, you can now say, I'm the kind of person who does this. So instead of bringing people together as a community, me and my friend at my friend's house, it's my friends and I doing this experience together because we are those kinds of people. And it interrupts, that stripping out of care that is signaled there. It's causing it's hard to figure out what the best way to spend your money is at the end of the day. Especially when you're there. I mean, it's not just everybody wants your money. It's, how do I even spend this well when everything's not just a gimmick. It's not Disney World because I'm not buying for a story or a narrative. It's
Right.
a specific quality or a specific, and like I said before, bang for your buck that you're looking for here as a result of being hosted somewhere. You're
Yeah, and
maximizing your dollar when you're doing the thing that was supposed to be about care.
yeah, and I think it's it's worse than that in we'll say two ways. Well, one is that affects the identity crisis that everyone's correctly talking about. There is an identity crisis, although trying to have one identity is the crisis, not these other things, right? You are identifying directly with your experience and not with your relationship, right? Because that's what Vegas is. Again, it's what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. What? Like, no, that can't be true. Like, that's
Well,
just
funnily enough,
false.
today it's the complete opposite. You go to Vegas to take pictures and show everybody.
Right. But what actually happens there is you don't tell anybody. So you take pictures. Well, you're not going to take. Unless you're running some sort of
If you go to the
scam
Sphere,
business, no one's going to see the sin, right? They're just going to see the bright lights and say, right, because you're sharing what you were attracted to. You're not necessarily sharing what you did. You're just saying, look at all this cool stuff that's here. You're not saying which of that's cool things you engaged in, right? And I think that's part of the, not all obviously, but part of it. But the worst problem in my mind is that, as I've said before, you can pay caring people, but you can't pay people to care. But what happens when you take the idea of hospitality as a profession seriously and you turn it into an industry, which is a proceduralizing of it, we'll say, right, at a higher scale, and then you drain the places where you need caring people because you're just paying so much more, right? So you're warping the world with cash effectively,
and
you're
the key there is you're still preserving the aesthetic of care.
Right. Well, it's probably genuine care. There are people that work at hotels that really care about people, and that's why they work there, right? That's a thing I have experienced. And then there are
if
other
anybody
people,
watching us knows some hotels like that, then drop them in the comments because
Yeah.
at least get these people some extra business.
Yeah, exactly. Usually they're in small towns on the trip up to New England.
You've got B&Bs, which are owned by small consumers for the most
Right.
part.
Right.
They tend to live
Yep.
there. They're involved every day.
Yep.
Sure, you can have people who want to be involved and care about people, but they're probably not working at the 5-star restaurant or the 5-star hotel that caters to the world's ultra rich.
But some of them are. And that's the problem, is that we've drained some of that caring talent away.
So that's the only way for these people who care to be able to provide for themselves. It's a runaway flaw here.
But they only need to provide for themselves because they've been removed from their relationship network, right? Because when you're in your relationship network, the need to care for yourself, like to have your own place to live and all that, goes way down. And then all of a sudden and that drops your anxiety, your general anxiety. Like if you live near your family, unless you have a horrible family, and some people do, like I get that, just not as many people as will say think they have a horrible family, then your anxiety's higher, right? Because when your family's around, even if it's just extended family, you have a place to go in case everything goes, horribly wrong, right? You have a refuge that's available to you, right? Like if something happened, I can drive up to Roanoke, Virginia, and hang out with my cousin for a few days. It's not a problem. It wouldn't be a big deal, right? I know that. I don't have to ask him. Like I know what's going on up there, right? I'm sure of that. There's other relatives I have further north, we'll say, but it's not so much of a problem when they're really close to you, right? But when you remove people who are caring from their relationship network, from their care network, then they have an anxiety too. And so it just becomes harder, we'll say, all around once you've corrupted, because I think that's the right term, this idea of caring and hospitality. Because I think that the sacred rituals of hospitality, which we've almost completely lost, were a way to show people what caring looks like and how to do it. And so a lot of this is people care, right? But they don't know how to care about, we'll say, guests in their home.
Mhm.
And so instead they care about the climate, which is not something you can care about, or they care about a war halfway across the world, or they care about starving people in another country.
Right.
Or they
An
care
interesting
about,
conversation is no substitute for the food you might bring over or
right.
the bottle of wine that you might share
Right,
with a new
but it
neighbor.
also, it's a corruption of your attention. So let's suppose you have a certain amount of caring, but it's at these abstractions like foreign
Mhm.
war. Foreign war is an abstraction. If it doesn't affect your daily life, the odds that it's an abstraction go way up. If it can never affect your life in a significant fashion, like, oh, maybe my goods and services from this country will go up because they're having a war. Well, I mean, that kind of affects you, but like, let's be realistic. like,
Or
like,
trying to figure out exactly how a tariff might be affecting things.
right. Like, this is ridiculous. These are abstractions. They're not near enough to you for you to be caring about,
Or
for you to be worrying
blaming
about.
things on this, that, or the other ism or archy. These
Right.
are, it's important to understand and have an ability to frame things
Yeah.
and to follow them from their beginnings to where we are at now.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean the only way to do that is to have a totalizing system and which blinds you from other
Right.
possibilities.
But if you're an individual, you need a totalizing system because you need to understand it alone by yourself.
Mhm.
That's why I keep telling people, no, you don't want to be an individual. You can't be an individual. You never will be an individual. You never will have been an individual, right?
Now you can be a
You've never been an
person.
individual, right? You're a person connected to other people and to nature and to yourself, because yourself isn't just one thing, right? And so your sort of task is to hold all that together and sort of reverse the entropy of all of it flying apart. And so when you look at mental illness that way, you kind of realize, oh, wait a minute, that's what mental illness is. It's your inability to hold your inner self together with the world around you, right? To make these connections from the inside of you to the other parts inside of you to the outside of you to other people, right?
And defining yourself by what's going on externally, especially in today's current situation. It's actually harder to do that in a way. It's not like earlier social media where you were sharing your thoughts or sharing your experiences. Now you are going out to take pictures to put on this thing. And there's a little bit of a turning in the same way of the hospitality turning going on again in the social media space.
Well, because that's also been turned into an industry.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
It's aimed at the consumer. Yeah.
There's an industry of sharing your experience with others through materialistic means like pictures, right? And it's like, look at where I went, right? It's like, oh, whereas I think I was telling you this story earlier. I was at the Hoover Dam, and I was like, oh, we've got time. We were going to do something else after. We're going to go up to the Valley of Fire in Nevada. But the tour is like 2 hours, and it was the beginning. It was still relatively early in the day. We had time, but what happened was I discovered, much to my surprise, by the way, especially after that drive from Vegas down to the Hoover Dam, which isn't that long a drive, but like you really get the sense that you're in the desert. Like you're definitely in the desert. I had full cell service, and there were a couple of people who were foreigners on my Discord server. And I said, you know what? I bet they'd like to see this. So instead of going on a tour of the Hoover Dam, I turned on my camera and showed them around the Hoover Dam and Lake Mead and all that. Like just walked it all the way around, across and back across, and just showed them a bunch of sites. And there are no pictures of that. I do have pictures of the Hoover Dam, obviously, because I could not take pictures. I'm a photographer, after all, among other things. But that experience was just basically for them. Mm-hmm. It wasn't meant to be shared with everybody, right?
And you're being very hospitable there because you're bringing in, someone who can't have these experiences is necessarily foreign to them, pardon the pun.
Exactly.
you're bringing them in, you're having an experience together, and you're focusing on something together. It may not be food,
Right.
and it may not be just lodging, but that is another version of hospitality that can still exist even in this, the world of hyper reality.
Exactly. Yeah, that was the point I was going to make. Was like I can't be hospitable to people in Europe in the same way I would like to, right? But I can leverage social media to be hospitable to them because I could have gone on that tour. But it could have been Sarah and I just going on the tour and screw them. I could have done that, but like we have a relationship on the Discord server. Like we're friends. One of them I met, right? He was in the US. I flew out to meet him, right? So, like, this is important to sort of understand the way that we can sort of revitalize, if you will, hospitality, given our technology. Like, so you can leverage the technology in ways that can at least kind of increase the hospitality, right? And I think that's sort of the problem, is that because we've lost the idea of hospitality and what it means, and we've turned it into this profession and then turned it into an industry, we don't have a way to revitalize the world. It's all flattened out. People understand hospitality now as an industry instead of understanding it's this sacred ritual that, not one single universal sacred ritual, those don't exist, right? But it's a sacred ritual that helps you as an individual, we'll say, or as a person, right, to cohere to relate to the world outside yourself. And it shows you the contrast of what to pay attention to. So you could pay attention to the the hotel and the way you're supposed to use your phone to make your reservations and all that, right? Or you could pay attention to your hosts that maybe they have an Airbnb and you get to stay there, right? It's up to you, right? But when you don't know the way to pay attention to the things closest to you, you end up paying attention to the climate or to a foreign war or to the politics of a country you're never going to live in ever, right? Like, or
Canada?
Or somebody screaming war at you on a stage in London who's actually kind of dumb. There's all kinds of things you will pay attention to and not realize they're less valuable. Like, people actually think that something like the climate is so valuable that we have to switch to electric cars. It basically they can do math and realize that's never going to happen. Like it's a 75-year
No, we
project.
should care about being sustainable, but that's different than the point that you're making.
You should care.
Right.
If you're relying on other people to build electric cars, that's not you caring. That's you enslaving yourself to those other people to do that work instead of just not having a lawn. I've never had a lawn, by the way, ever. 2 houses, no lawns.
I've mowed plenty of lawns.
Yeah, but
None
lawns are more damaging. One of them
was mine.
But they're more damaging to the environment and the quote climate for real than electricity usage. People don't know that. Than cars are. Oh, they're far more damaging to the atmosphere than cars are. And people don't know that. And I'm like, I don't believe you. I think that you've been fooled into thinking that you're helping the climate, but you're not.
Things like transportation, which would have been involved at these old style hospitals for pilgrims, where they would have not just cared for you, but for your horses, and you could exchange for a fresh horse and things like that. That's totally been removed from the equation. Hospitality isn't just about you entering the home. Right. It's about you and the things connected to you.
Or the village, to be fair. I mean, hospitality is more about, the stranger entering the city or something, or the stranger entering the town or the village. And I think that's absolutely critical. And it's interesting too, because Carl Benjamin, Sargon of Akkad, just released a video today like 2 or 3 hours ago or something that I listened to, where he talked about the difference between America and the UK, because he just got back from a long visit, I guess, to America. And one of the things he discovered, we'll say, about himself, and I'm paraphrasing and not framing it at all using the words he used, because I'm American and I can get away with that. We're exceptional after all. Ask any European, they'll tell you. He basically said, like, oh, I had changed as a person and I was less hospitable to people. I was less nice to people. I wasn't paying attention to them and to what was going on around me, even though I'm British. And he said, like, I used to. This is a recent thing with him. And I think he was more or less linking it to the country I live is going down the tubes. America's in much better shape, which is it's an interesting video. People should check it out. Actually, I think it gives you a lot more hope for the U.S. And sort of puts the U.K. in a different frame. But that idea that he wasn't, we'll say, being hospitable anymore, or as hospitable as a guest in a foreign land, is super important, even when they were being super nice to him. Like that's what made him notice. Like, these Americans are being really nice to me and caring about things that I wasn't thinking of. My bad, right? I should have been paying more attention to people around me. It's like, yes. And again, he used to, but something changed. And so there's part of that materialism or whatever sneaking in that sort of, we'll say, changed the world. But what I know we had some open questions. Did you want to address some of the sort of open questions around?
Let me pull those up on my side.
Yeah, I mean, I think your first question, well, the others are mine, I think, but is hospitality meant to draw attention together? And I thought that was a really prescient and important frame to talk about this in. Is the role of hospitality is to have these sacred rituals of bringing people together, particularly strangers, right? But it doesn't have to be like somebody you've never met, right? It can be somebody who's strange to the moment, strange to your house, somebody who visits infrequently, but right? Things like that. And so, yeah, I mean, my answer, if you will, is that yes, the purpose of hospitality is in fact to give you a sacred ritual of some kind, whatever culture you're in, right? Not a universal one, that brings attention together so that you can cooperate as a unit, right? So that you can be in communion. I think that's a really good way to phrase it. Is that sort of what you were getting at?
Yeah, I was thinking about it on a couple of different levels. The first one was just kind of on a phenomenological level. What happens when you're being hosted or hosting someone? The host has to worry about things like allergies, for example. The person being hosted needs to be mindful about how not to be disrespectful or where the boundaries are. But those things come together in cooperation in order to create a balance of shared space. And so you both, it really is a coming together. And then one of the other levels I was thinking about this is there are a lot of cultural practices where the stranger is not, deferred to or more highly ranked than anyone in the community, but as being the stranger or the guest of honor, we might say these days, they're going to get the place of the portion for that honored person. So there's an honoring of that is demanded by that cultural set, whether it's as far as East Asia or as close as your next door. Most people still have these from their culture, and then those come down in part to us from the mythical layer of how we interact with reality. I can't think of a single group that doesn't have at least one significant story where a stranger is not a stranger isn't hosted correctly, or someone is hosting things correctly isn't a major piece. Almost every Greek tragedy is about what happens when you have improperly hosted something, or when you are not hospitable in the right ways. And those will trickle down to other people, and they'll be drawn out in other ways. But this is something that goes as far back and is still as prescient to us because, and this is kind of bringing it back to where the question began, was how do you interact with uncontacted peoples like in the Amazon? And they found out it's essentially a exchange of giving gifts and giving them back. And then, turns out this happened when the missionaries were going all over around the world. So there is a certain thing about give and take and coming together so that you can coexist in the same space out of care. Because if I don't care about the other person while I'm doing this, you can't do these behaviors. You won't achieve anything other than probably some sort of conflict over resource.
Right. Well, and I want to. It's not so much because I think Anselman's kind of got it. Always good to be outgoing to people, even if it's not always appreciated. I don't think it's necessarily about outgoing, and I think I want to sort of harken back to this original comment, right? Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares, right? And I think that's more the important part of this is it's not about, we'll say, merely being outgoing. And it's not even about the person that you're with. It's about that third thing, that potential in the quote vertical causality, as I discussed earlier, right? Where you don't know what can emerge from the communion that you could have if you are hospitable to somebody. Like you don't know. And that potential could be wonderful. And so you want to start out that potential with gifts, with goodness, with honor, with care, right? You want to care about that communion, that relationship, so that good things can emerge from it, right? Hopefully in line with a whole. I
just want to add a point that it doesn't just emerge out of nothing. It goes back to the cooperation, being together, and finding something that is in to use more clinical language or for, I was going to say secular language, but anyway,
non-religious language, secular language. Yeah.
The point is, it's you can't just expect things to pop up. You have to have that communion.
Right. And I don't, so, are we drawing attention together? I want to say we're drawing attention up instead of together, right? Because together is a very horizontal, flattening sort of word. So hospitality is designed to draw your attention up, right? That goes back to the angels quote that.
I'm also thinking about a lot of the rituals that are associated with welcoming. Whether it's from my background or others, there is usually something actually lifted up that everyone's going to look at.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And because that's the potential that's bigger than you plus me. Right. That's the hospitality grants that there is a potential bigger than you plus me, and we're both looking for it, hopefully up at the same thing, right? That's why the lifting up is important. So again, it's not so much, drawing attention together. And I do think that also, again, having people attend to the same thing, like at the same time in the same place, is more about training your attention. So you're not paying attention to something abstract like the climate or the foreign war or the trade problem or whatever nonsense people make up. People make up a lot of nonsense. That, I'm not saying they're not things. I'm saying that you don't affect them. Why are you paying attention to? There's so many things in the world that you don't affect. You can't pay attention to any of them, basically. So you gotta pick what you're paying attention to very carefully, because I think that's part of the divide and conquer strategy that I mentioned earlier, where if you want to put it in terms of warfare. But then another question is, what is the relationship of hospitality to politeness or etiquette or something? And I think the politeness and the etiquette is part of how we segue into things like hospitality, where we are looking up at the same thing. We are trying to commune. We are trying to create relationship. It's very hard to create relationship if you fly into Vegas and you go to some large, hotel, right? Now you might have an interaction in an elevator or something, or you know, there's a way in which you might strike up a conversation with somebody, right? But ultimately, you're really not engaging in a sort of personalized relationship that is custom to the situation where there's some sort of actual communion involved.
I think the point that I want to raise in this context is that etiquette and politeness are ordered, but they're not procedures, and they're not procedural. Uh, Usually, if you care, in the way that we're talking about here, you can have books talking about like what is etiquette, how does it work. Yes, there is an order of the knife being placed here, next to the plate on the, I think it's the left side. Here I am forgetting my etiquette for the table, as it were. But it's that etiquette that becomes the ground for common sense and a place where people can meet each other.
In common interaction. Like
it limits a lot of chaos.
Right. Like I know where my utensils are because you put them in the same place every time. Like that's
and I'm not reaching for your drink because I know where mine is.
Because I know where mine is. Exactly. And so that kind of opens the door, lays the baseline for a communion. And politeness and etiquette, I think, are completely lost. Even 15 years ago, I saw them more. And when I was a kid, I saw them a lot. Like that was a big deal, right? But now it's completely destroyed in most of the world, and people don't give it any value. But it really does allow you that doorway in. And if you can't even be polite to somebody, how are you supposed to be hospitable towards them, right? It's a small step, but it's a super important first step, I think. And that's for me, that's part of what's missing, is that these people do not have the smaller steps that make things, that open the door for communion, right? That open the door for hospitality, that open the door for working with each other in a relationship that emerges into something greater than just you and I meeting at a restaurant, which we did, by the way. But yeah.
So I think this is a good lead-in for the next question, which is kind of, where do we see these things as being accomplished in the past, which we've touched on at points, and what's perhaps a place for it today, given the situation we find ourselves making this video conversation right now.
Yeah, and I think, again, old Vegas versus new Vegas. And I think there's so much wrapped up in that. Right? Like I do think there's a scaling issue. You scale from the more personable mobster who actually does have some level of care about their guests, believe it or not, despite their other activities, we'll say, to these corporations. There's just walking around old Vegas versus new Vegas, the new strip. Huge difference. It's like it's palpable to me. Other people don't appear to be able to feel these things. I can feel every city I go to. I can feel the difference. But it's palpable to me. I'm like, oh, this is so corporate in the new strip. It's so corporate. It's so kind of soul draining. Whereas the old strip, still, I'm not a fan. I'm not saying I'm never going back or anything crazy. But also, like, I'm not spending a week in Vegas. There's no way. I mean, I might spend a week at a hotel in Vegas and then go a bunch of places that are nearby. But I don't think there are enough places for me to go to. But I don't see that happening either. But And we only spent 3 days, right? The other 4 days we drove into Arizona and stayed there instead. Um, I there's just no way that isn't different, and that scaling problem doesn't exist there. And I think that as we try to scale up and universalize, and because this is part of the theme, and I would argue part of the quote war, if you want to put it in those terms, is that the more we try to universalize things, the more we lose the past, right? The more individualistic and reduced the world becomes, and that just destroys all the relationship that allows us the unity. And I think that because we've abandoned the past, we don't know, we don't even know which side does the fort go on, right?
It goes in the plastic wrapping with the napkin and the knife.
Always
right?
keep the fork in your left hand, Americans. Well, there we Ansel. He's Scottish. Can you trust the Scots? I don't know. I have an image of it as just gambling places in the middle of the desert. Yeah, but it's not. Like there's a whole hospitality industry out there. Just they stole it from hospitals and hostels and places, right? And it's entertainment. It's hospitality turned towards entertainment and hedonism. And in the past, you wouldn't have done that, and you kind of see that, right, in the Sodom and Gomorrah story, right, where it's like, what's going on there, right? Because that's the story of hospitality. That's right. What it is. I mean, it's not
right.
only
and
that.
There's something we didn't touch on there, which is that in order to be properly hospitable in that sense, in the older sense, it was about recognizing boundaries. And so the part I think you're alluding to, which is the rapping on the door, so saying we want to know these people too, wink wink. That is exactly the opposite of right. That kind of hosting of angels, as was alluded to by Ludwig in the comments before.
Exactly. And I think that's part of the problem, is that you don't really know, because we don't have a proper sense of what hospitality was, right, what politeness was, how this stuff was supposed to work. We've lost all that to some extent, or at least the younger generation certainly has. We don't have a way to relate to all the things that it gives us, right, or that it could give us. And so, nowadays, you meet some weird, we'll say, I don't know, what kind of person would you see on the internet? Like super anxious person on the internet, and you just drive out to see them, and you hope things go okay. I think it worked out all right, RJ. But and to be fair, that whole meeting was enabled because I had a host there that So
in that case, it was the restaurant that was being host, so that two strangers could come together, and that's a different kind of thing altogether.
But I was in DC to visit somebody I had already visited in DC, right? So that it was deliberate. Like I know what I'm doing to some extent, not all the time, but I know what I'm doing, right? And so and Father Eric joined us in the beginning, right? And so it is that transition, that and that really, to me, that really helped. Like I've done the meet strangers on the internet thing my whole life, like actually my whole life since I was like 15.
And he's still here, folks. Hasn't been made into wind chimes yet.
Exactly. And those discussions about should you take the an offer from somebody you've only met on the internet, even if you talk to them for 6 months, to drive you to a party. And my answer was always, no, of course not. They could be a psychopath. And they're like, well, I wouldn't drive with you. And I'm like, well, okay, that maybe you shouldn't. Like, I don't, right? And people would be shocked. They'd be like, that would hurt you. And I'm like, I don't care. I think
you're bringing up an interesting point, which is that, there's the deracination of the personal from communication. Right. People look at it completely different if people are meeting, through mutual people they've had conversations with, versus if they're doing online dating.
Right.
which
Right.
is an interesting little thing there. That what's the real difference? I certainly couldn't point one out to you right now.
Exactly.
But
Right.
going back to where we might revitalize and revivify and adapt to the certain situation, which is framing I prefer over conflictual framing, be it what's the term, the Mark, you hate this thing. It's like the instead of cooperation, it's the what do they say? No. It's when you're fighting against each other.
Oh,
Instead of
the opposition, the opponent processing.
yes, opponent processing. Thank you. So it's not opponent processing of one side pushing against the other. It's this is a thing about the world that does something that it's something about the world that does something that people do, that people did for a reason. And we can re-explore that. It doesn't. You can be discreet about it. You can reference religious things, but it doesn't have to be off limits or contentious when you think about adapting to the situation. So that's just my 2 cents.
Right. And I think that because in the past we had a sense of politeness and etiquette, which is sort of we'll say the children's version of hospitality, which I think is fair. Like, I mean, we're all children about something, right? There's a ton of stuff I know.
Well, you have to share your toys, otherwise.
Right, but
that's bad etiquette.
It goes back to that first step. Like, you lose politeness, you're not going to keep hospitality for more than a generation, right? It's gonna get corrupted. It's still gonna be there because you can't get rid of it, right? You can't get like, we're all on a planet. We all need to interact. So
yeah, you're not going to show up at a hostel and be cursed at and told to get out of the door, and they're going to still want your money.
That's right. Exactly. Well, and people put up with that sort of thing. I've seen it, and I'm always like, why wouldn't you just object and get your money back and leave? But they don't, because it's separated now, and because people don't have a sense of hierarchy. I was watching this interesting. Somebody posted a video on the important videos on the Discord server, on the Market Wisdom Discord server, and they were talking about the loss of these little relationship bubbles, right? The family and the friends and the acquaintances and all that nonsense. And he used the term Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It just sets me on edge, because Maslow would have shot you. Maslow's spinning in his grave every time somebody says hierarchy of needs. He hated the idea of hierarchy, which is ironic, because, and to be fair to him, needs are not hierarchical at all, ever. Needs by definition are equal and universal. It blows my mind when people say hierarchy of needs. I'm like, do you not understand how the world works? Because it sounds like you don't understand how the world works. Needs are not hierarchical. It occurred to me that the reason why he said hierarchy of needs, we'll say unbeknownst to him, was because he very much had the sense that hierarchy is missing. I was like, oh, all these people using hierarchy of needs, now it makes sense, because now they understand there's a hierarchy of attention or importance or relevance realization, all the same thing, by the way. And therefore, right, we have to juggle that, right? We have to resolve that inherent conflict, because it's an inherent conflict. It's not an opposition. That's different. It's an inherent conflict that you have to manage. And you can't do that without politeness. You can't do that without hospitality, because when someone's going through a rough time, they need other people. And those other people have to be hospitable to put up with them being a jerk or being useless or, whatever state they're in. I mean, it's very much what a hospital does. You're sick, you go to the hospital, they take care of you because you cannot take care of yourself, right? Like, I remember at one point, I forget what happened.
I mean, this to a degree is why hospitals do not turn people away.
Right. Well, they're not supposed to, right? And in the United States, they're not allowed to.
It creates a whole bunch of different issues, but
people
pointing at that this was such a thing to the degree that even though when we lost that thing, we're still dealing with the downstream effects. Right.
Well, we still have the law. It's always been a law in the United States. You can't turn somebody away from a hospital in the United States. It's not possible. It's not legal, and they almost never do it. Like,
and until I may be wrong
happen.
about this, but until recently, most hospitals were not for profit and were not privately owned.
Almost no hospital. So in the state of South Carolina, there were no hospitals were for profit until like 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe less, maybe 10. Like, I don't remember.
And would you say they're better now?
No, they're clearly not. Although
Right.
I did have the experience of the other hospital in Columbia, the Baptist hospital, oddly enough. The service was phenomenal. I was like, this is way better than the big hospital down the street. I was shocked. I was like, wow.
Fewer people. Those people are there more worth the
maybe not. I mean, I think it was the Baptist hospital. And despite the fact that they got bought out, same people still working there, and they're really caring people, and you can tell. But like, when you're in the hospital and say you throw up, right, which I did once, all over the place, projectile vomit, all over the place, right? They just clean it up and they think nothing of it. Because I couldn't clean it. I was apologetic, and she said, "Oh, don't worry about it." And I'm like, but I threw up, and it's fine. We do this all day. I'm like, oh. I wouldn't even want to clean up my own throw up all day, much less somebody else's. So, that's what it's for. It's a safety net for people when they're in a situation where they need a safety net, and we don't have that because we don't even have politeness. I mean, it still exists, but now it's completely corrupted, and now it's being moved and used. Right, it's been moved to Las Vegas. Not all of it, we'll say, but a bunch of it has been moved to Las Vegas, including from other countries. A lot of foreigners in Las Vegas. I don't know if you noticed that. Right, people seeking work, and used towards entertainment and hedonism. And so now the hospitality is being misdirected towards the very thing that, we'll say, Sodom and Gomorrah story sort of hinted against doing.
It's always fun when an avowed non-theist quotes stories from the Bible.
there we go. So I think that's part of the problem, is that you because we don't have that connection to the past and all the stories of hospitality. And I've been watching Wheel of Time. Season 3 is getting very interesting. I would never read the books because they're written by a child. So if you think Jordan is a good writer.
Aragon was written by a child too. I'll have you know. That ages me.
A lot of these sci-fi writers are awful authors. Just terrible writing. But his storytelling is interesting, and people don't know the difference, and that's a different problem. Unlike George R.R. Martin, who has terrible writing, terrible sentence construction, terrible paragraph construction, and awful stories. It's just everything about him is just no redeeming quality there at all.
But the dragons are coming, Mark.
Yeah. Well, they have dragons in Wheel of Time too, but they have these hospitality rituals, and they have these sacred spaces where the rules don't apply. Oh, normally we'd attack you, but not here because we're outside the sacred city. It's like, oh, how interesting, and so you can see it, that politeness and that longing for hospitality sneaking back into the media, right? Because it's there in Robert Jordan's books, right? It's there in sci-fi. It's all over the place. Actually, a lot of sci-fi is hospitality based, right? Like the rules of the world are hospitality heavy, unlike the real world, right? And unlike, we'll say, a sane and balanced world where you have a balance of the legal, a balance of the we'll say secular ritual, and then a balance of the religious. That's the correct thing. You get 3 things you've got to balance. One's higher than the other 2, by the way. Might be a hint. That third thing that's up above you, and then we've lost that, but it keeps pushing back in, right? Whether it's Vegas, right, because of the loss of politeness, the loss of the anchor, or sort of something else. This sci-fi media, right, TV, whatever. And then I think what is the proper role for hospitality, we'll say, today in today's world? And I don't know, what do you think about that, RJ?
I think it's pretty much going to be the same way it always was, and it's something between you as a person and the other people who you can go out and touch. And whether that means touching them through your phone, saying hi and checking up on them, or being on the same page when you're planning a trip, or that touch is, the hand on the shoulder when you come through the door. These things are important in ways that aren't really easily talked about until they're gone. So the best thing we can do is just try to care about the people that we want to host in our lives, be good hosts, kind of wherever we are. Just
Right.
because you're on a train doesn't mean that you're not being hosted on that train, and other people deserve that kind of respect as fellow travelers, but more so as fellow people in that little room. So I think once we start caring, not because we're supposed to or we're given a reason to, but because we can see the good it does in the world, I think we can start to care a little bit more about the things that matter, rather than caring about materialism.
That's good. That's well said. Yeah, I think the materialism really reduces us down to not understanding care. Like, I never hear anybody talk about care, almost ever anymore, right? But they're using the word love.
Economists do, and they're really annoying about it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but they're not talking about the same thing. But I
Mhm.
hear the word love a lot, and when they say love, I think they're talking about care. Not all the time, but a lot of the time. I think that's actually what they're referring to, is people aren't giving, we'll say, proper care or enough care, or whatever. And I really do hear that when people are using the word love. And I think that part of it is just this flattening. Like, John Vervaeke actually pointed this out in Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, misnamed. It should be To the Meaning Crisis. That we equivocate on the word love so much that we're using it to mean too many different things effectively. And I think that's part of the flattening, where you have one word representing,
Too
say,
many
6
things.
concepts, right? It's like, no, that's not good. I mean, it's not saying you can never do that, but also we're just doing it way too much, especially with that particular word. It's funny too, because John says, well, love isn't this and love isn't that. And I'm like, well, actually, sometimes it is, John. Again, you're not appreciating your own point about equivocation. So people are using it those ways too, right? They're not using it to mean the same thing. They're using it in many cases to mean care. And it's funny you brought up train, because one of the examples that Carl Benjamin used in his talk today was, he was on a train and he grabbed his luggage really abruptly off the top rack or something on the train. And a woman that was there would say, like, did you feel trapped? Right? Like, right. And I was like, what a fascinating thing to say. But like, he didn't use the word, I don't believe, but like, she really cared if that had happened to him. And he was like, this is my bad. I've totally changed. I didn't used to be like this. Wasn't really paying proper attention to people near me. Now, this is a Brit in America. What's going on with that, right? Because we think of it the other way around. Like, it's the rude Americans. It's like, is it though? Was it ever? Because I got questions. I'm just saying, I got questions, right? And so that's really the issue, is that, he said, I've changed, and this is not good for me, and this is my bad. And the idea that we don't have proper care for each other, we're not having proper hospitality, and the degree to, like, how bad is this? Well, look, having been to Europe, I have to say my experience is the same as Carl Benjamin's experience. Way worse in Europe, guys. Sorry, I hate to break it to you, but actually worse. I have had this discussion many times with many Europeans. They know their service is garbage. It's very bad. It's just part of the territory for them. And I'm like, service industry here is huge, right? It's huge and very important. And it's not just important on the level of commerce. It's also important on the level of commerce. People take a great deal of pride in being friendly places. Not every place in the U.S. Don't go to Boston and be expecting hospitality. I'm from Boston. It ain't there. I get that. It is there in places, but like no.
Go
It's
to a
just
warmer place. Go to a
no
warmer
one's
place.
gonna be overtly rude to you in that way, but also Southern hospitality is a thing, and you can tell right away. It's one of the things that Sargon talked about too in the video. Was the South is really friendly, and it's a lot more like when I grew up in England. It's like, oh, interesting. And it's the same kind of, it's Scots Irish, so same people, right? They're very English compared to the rest of the United States down here. So yeah, I mean, I think that when you don't have a proper balance for the sacredness of what you're trying to do with hospitality, which is communion, right? It's not mere service, which is what it's been reduced to. That's the proper relationship that we need to have. That's what we need to think about if we want to revitalize or revive this idea wholesale, right? I mean, if we're actually taking seriously, like, what is the proper role of hospitality today? I do think we need to um, uh, revive the word care in our vocabulary and take that more seriously and start to say, all right, there's this, we'll forget about love, like whatever. Let's take the idea of care seriously and what it means in a three-dimensional world when you're caring about something that is bigger than you, that is abstract, but it doesn't abstract, we'll say, universally, but it only abstracts to the moment. Like, what is it that you and I are able to commune over, right, or commune in the moment where we are? Because it's not the Ukraine war, right? It's not starving people in Africa. It's not the political turmoil in France or the UK. Like, and even RJ, believe it or not, I can't commune with you about whatever the hell's going on in Israel. I don't even know what it is. I don't want to know.
That's why I only check in every so often about that topic myself. But
some people do a very good job.
You raise a really interesting thing on that connection point, which is that several years ago there were some programs trying to bring both sides together, and they found that hosting soccer camps where the kids could all care about playing soccer was a way to create shared ground and create relationships, and these people would go on to be more hospitable to each other, less aimed at trying to take the other person's land. And some of that is through the conversations they would have had at the camp. Some of that is through the participation that they had at the camp, but it's the care that those things engender and being able to see another person as something worth caring about because it affects you and impacts you, but also just because it's the best thing for both parties to do is to care.
Right.
So I think focusing a little bit on that is something that helps both everybody personally and everybody else too.
Well, I like that too, because one pattern that I've noticed, and this is navigating patterns after all, one pattern that I've noticed is that the people that struggle the most with concepts like reality, they say like, what is real and what is LARPing, and they use all these goofy terms, like kayfabe and all this nonsense words mean absolutely nothing. That just betray their inability to sense reality, which I would say is the easiest thing in the world to understand and sense. Like, if you're having a problem with that, that's really a you thing, guys. None of them are into sports, right? Or to the degree that they're into sports is, we'll say, a much lesser degree. And they're usually very derisive when they discuss sports. They're like, oh, sports is just competition or something. And as Jordan Peterson has pointed out many times, like, no. That competition is couched in cooperation, in agreement, which is going to be Friday's topic, by the way, agreement. It's couched in agreement to play by the rules, to play the game, to have a winner, even if it's not you, right? And like, there's all these agreements, there's all of this framing that goes on around cooperation, right? Around communion in a sport. And if we're derisive towards sports, if we're dismissive of them, if we don't take them seriously, I think that causes a real problem for for communion and for hospitality and for politeness. What
So
do you think?
on the sports thing, it rings a bell for something that I was thinking about earlier, which is Sundays have gone from being about the community to being about
Mm,
football for a fair number of people. But
right,
that doesn't mean that the hospitality is lost. That doesn't mean that the care is lost. You can still care about the cookout. You can still care about the people you invite over. You can still say, we're going to stop and we're not going to eat as people show up. We're going to wait till the food is laid out and do things in an order.
right,
But that doesn't mean that it's proceduralizing the hospitality. So there's
right, right,
flexibility there. It doesn't have to be a football game. It could be a birthday party. It could be a number of things. But I think those are my. Don't I think I have any more thoughts on the pretty fresh out on how to care more at this point.
No, that's great. I just want to sort of note then that also that college football in particular down south is a religion, right? And sports in New England at the professional level, religious. I mean, people talk like that all the time, and I think there's very much this idea that in the quote flattening that we sort of or at least that I sort of talk about a lot. That's what's happening is that we've kind of flattened down the world so that religion is now sports, right? And that's our communion. Like that's how we're that's and there's a great deal of competition, which is fine. There's always competition. Competition's not bad. It's not opposition. Those aren't the same thing, right? And people are confused about that. But yeah, and then I just think that pattern's there. Like I kind of see this flattening. That's why I talk about flattening all the time. I'm like, how do you guys not see this? This is kind of, like you just see the flattening. To me, it's just absolutely everywhere you look. You see this flattening. Um, Gustavs, should we be hospitable towards our enemies, assuming we have proper enemies? Well, yeah, that kind of depends on what you mean by enemies, sir.
Maybe to the representative of your enemy, as such.
Right, right. And I think that there is a way to be hospitable to your enemies. I was talking earlier about the Wheel of Time, and there's this tribe that fights all the other tribes apparently, but they met them outside the sacred city, and they were like, no, peace here, because that's what you do, right? And then there was a bunch of hospitable stuff going on. It's an interesting scene actually. Some of that's reasonably well acted, at least. I guess there's a lot of corruption from the books, which I refuse to read because he writes like a 4-year-old. But some of the themes are still there, especially we'll say around hospitality. So I know we've had some interaction in the live chat, but what do you want to let some people in and see if anybody
Let's
wants to jump
see
in?
what the people think, and we can be hospitable to whoever wants to chime in.
I'm happy to show some hospitality. If you'd like to jump in, I'm going to post the link. I can only pin it on navigating patterns, unfortunately, but it's there, so you can jump in if you want to, and feel free to ask questions or in the chat or whatever. I think that, and this has been fun, RJ. So I'm glad you sort of agreed to do this with me, to do this exploration. I like doing these little explorations because I see these things usually at a pretty large fractal layer, and that's what let's say it's most salient, right? Because it's affecting, we'll say, the most people. But it's good to bring it back down to the very personal level. And I didn't even think, before this started, about a lot of the stuff we talked about, but particularly about the sports and how that flattening is there, and the interaction, we'll say, of sports really exemplifies the different roles of hospitality. So like I go to my cousin's house the last time I think we were up north, And he invited us over for the game on Sunday, and my goodness, it was just food constantly, way before the game began. It's like food's coming out, right? And like he doesn't know what potato skins are. He thinks they're just potatoes cut in half with a bunch of stuff on them,
Wow,
which is
hi.
not what potato skins are. But I'm not complaining. I was stuffed afterwards. I can tell you that much. But
That's
I ate
proper
two of
potato
them.
skin.
Yeah, it's like that's a half a potato with extra stuff on it, bro.
But
That's
that
not a
gives
potato
me
skin.
a moment to kind of come back on something that I missed earlier, which is
Oh
that
yeah, sure.
part of when you're being a good host and
Mm,
someone asks for something,
mm,
um,
mm.
you generally don't give them the smallest amount that you could give them. You give
Right.
them
Yeah.
a
Right.
good portion. And
Yes.
generally, it's not, it's a little bit more than they would need or want, but that's
Yes.
you showing that you're giving to them.
Right. And you would give them more than you would take yourself of the same thing,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because
Like
you're
if you were going to go to a football game or a Super Bowl party, but the host told you everyone's limited to 2 sodas and you have to bring your own fork,
yeah.
it's gonna right off the bat. It's kind of like who's throwing the party here.
Right. No, it's a good point. It's a good point. Yeah. Yeah. Having hospitality means giving more than you are taking yourself from your own supplies, in essence. Right. And that is what it would have meant in the past. And that interaction in particular, I think is super important to understand because again, it's not about the person and it's not about equality because equality is a garbage frame anyway. It destroys the world. Don't do that. It really is about this interaction where you're communing with a higher thing, and that I think is super. That concept of communing with a higher thing is super important. Gustavs, it's so nice to see you, sir. How are you doing?
Good evening. Good to be here. I'm doing quite well, and I just hosted a small dinner party. Although it was
Oh,
mostly dinner and not much party, but it was nice anyway. So that's something I can bounce off of.
oh,
Yeah.
that's great. So you were showing hospitality to what your friends in the area, or
Yeah. These were friends from church primarily, although, it's not that one-dimensional. We have a lot of stuff. Yeah.
and what prompted the hospitality?
I think first of all, I just feel like I want to do that kind of stuff since COVID. People haven't been able to get out much, and
Mm,
I want to not only just get together with people, but also develop that as like a skill. Like I want to start hosting bigger and bigger parties, and I've got to start somewhere. So I'm making an effort, and I had a free evening, so
Oh, that's
that was
great.
that. Yeah.
That's really great. I mean, I did. I mean, maybe your ears were ringing. I did talk about my Hoover Dam hospitality. Um, Little backstory that you didn't get actually, but you'll hear it when you listen to the whole talk here. Um,
Okay.
so we didn't even bring that up. I mean, one of the things that did really destroy hospitality because it destroyed personal relationships as such was this idea of quote social distancing, which let me be 100% clear in case anybody's sort of not clear about this. And I did not come to this on my own, unfortunately. Sad to say, that's pure evil. Like if you want evil, saying social distancing is a form of pure evil and it is not redeemable in any way, shape, or form. Anybody trying to do that around me is going to get an earful, if not a face full of fist. Because and I didn't see it. It was actually a guy on Facebook who's an actor actually called Greg Ellis, who on not on Facebook, sorry, on Clubhouse. What he used to do is when he hosted rooms or when he was in rooms and people said social distancing, he said, no, there's no such thing as social distancing. It's physical distancing. You don't socially. And I was like, oh wow, that's so correct. Like that's so. How did I miss that? That was part of the psyop. But we've really lost interpersonal skills. And we were sort of talking about this earlier, Gustav. So I know you hopped in a little late. Um, the loss of things like politeness, right, and manners and etiquette is part of why we're not hospitable anymore. Because being hospitable is about care, and you can't care if you don't have a starting point, and that's sort of the starting point. And that fake news virus scam nonsense around social distancing really destroyed people's ability and willingness and practice with interaction with other people and learning to care about them. And I think that politeness and etiquette and manners is all part of the first step of caring enough to be in communion, right, with somebody. And that we linked all that back to this this larger thing of hospitality, where hospitality is all about the reason why you have this hospitable interaction, why you sort of revere the stranger, we'll say, is because you're both aiming at something higher, right? Which is the potential of what you can create together as a result of your union or your potential interaction, right? And so, what was happening, or what happened as a result of your hospitality?
I think we got to know each other a little better, and we just shared dinner, and we got to go through the motions of what it is like to have a dinner party. And so, we can replicate that. At least that's how I'm looking at it. But I'm honestly at the kind of, I think, a level that's a little bit too high for where I'm kind of realistically at the moment.
Right, but it
I want to
wasn't
keep working on it.
right, but it wasn't. See, this is interesting because the way you're talking about it is exactly our point earlier, right? The purpose of the party wasn't to have a party and get together. The purpose of the party was to practice hospitality effectively, right? Was to give a space to interact with each other, have, with manners, right? Have proper etiquette, right? And commune, so that we would know how to commune better, because we lost that skill during some silly fake news virus scam. So, I mean, that's great. I mean, you were right with us without even knowing it. So that's wonderful that you sort of exemplifying our point without even realizing, and listening to the whole talk here. So, yeah, I mean, that's great. RJ, what, you get any questions for Gustavs and his little hospitality experiment that he coincidentally happened to do on the day that we're doing this particular live stream?
None at the moment, but I will also exemplify how to be a good guest and say thank you for having me, and for hosting anybody else who comes on later, and hope the rest of the conversation goes well. It's always important to have proper etiquette and to say goodbye to your host, folks.
Thank you, RJ. It was great to have you. I really appreciate you taking the time, man. Have a great rest of your day.
Till the next one. Have a good one.
Yeah. So it's been an interesting, sort of exploration around this, but it's nice to hear your sort of bottom level, because we started with Vegas, obviously. As you know, I was in Vegas recently, right? I was thinking about hospitality as such, and the movement of hospitality, we'll say, out of hospitals and into entertainment and sin, or hedonism, roughly speaking, which is what Vegas is. And so that, you're sitting there going, listen, we lost a bunch of these skills as the result of this ridiculous pandemic-y thing, or whatever it really was, and now I want to get it back. So you sort of recognize the need on the ground, and of course you're European, in fact, so that's great, right? I don't think the Americans have really had a sense for how devastating this is, especially since in the north, like in New England, where I'm from, things are really bad still. Like, it's still people wearing masks. They're still talking about lockdowns every once in a while. I mean, it's just talk, but and down here it's like, yeah, 90 days and a restaurant's for reopen, buddy. Like, it's not years later. It's that year, 90 days. And so people in the United States don't really have a sense for what was lost in parts of the United States, right? Whereas you sort of felt it, and it's so prescient to you, and you care about it. We're linking care in there, obviously. And so you've taken steps to sort of reverse and sort of reinstitute a ritual of hospitality.
Yeah, and it's not only that. I think specifically, I think churches got hit really hard, especially our church, in
Oh yeah.
different ways maybe than other communities, but churches actually got targeted specifically. So they kind of got wiped out. And also, churches have a lot of well, our church has a lot of converts in there. So it's actually
Mm,
people trying to figure out what community is after they've lost a lot of their old communities.
mm,
So that's
right.
that's also kind of why I wanted to do this dinner, because people don't know how to socialize anymore, because there's new boundaries and there's new lives and things like that. So it's good to have a sense of what you actually
Right.
can do with people
Yeah, well, and we
in church.
and we covered this earlier. Online kind of destroyed the whole, like there's no need for politeness, for etiquette, for manners. Like all of that's out the windows with online, right? Like there's just you don't need that level of interaction anymore, or it's changed in some fundamental way where um, you know there's a new set of rules basically, but nobody knows what they are. Although to some extent they don't. I mean, I know a lot of people will talk about like we don't know how to do these things online. It's like, well, actually we do because online is older than you think. Just because you're new to it doesn't mean the people who aren't new to it like me don't know how to make this stuff work. I've been an online community builder for decades now. It's not that hard. Online communities, however, don't tend to last, or at least last in a single form. Book coming soon, by the way, hopefully next month. Um, but the fact that you've sort of sensed the problem and sort of addressed it, and just the fact that we have an outlet where we have a different set of rules, maybe no rules, right? Or maybe you don't know what the rules are, in an outlet called online, social media, whatever that's supposed to be. And it's probably a bad name for something much more important and much more interesting. We'll say. I don't necessarily mean in a good way. Um, and you sort of recognize this need, and you're like, oh, we've got these converts, and so where are these converts to your church from? Like, are they domiciled refugees from somewhere, from other thing, or where do you think they're coming from, if you know?
Uh, I think half of them are sort of people who were raised in a Christian, I don't know, structure or something, but then kind of didn't quite grasp the essence of it until, early 20s maybe. And by then you
Mm,
kind of get involved in a lot of stuff that definitely isn't Christian. And then you kind of have to get rid of that. So I'd say that's quite similar to myself. But the other half are people who I don't know, like probably not domiciled, but just people having crazy lives and end up in church, and you know, they feel
mhm,
Christ calling to
mhm,
them.
mhm.
There's no other way to put it. Like they see it and it gets them, and it's for the best. And they
Interesting.
involve themselves fully, and they really do get rid of their old lives. And I heard some stories this evening that you know that they stay with the owner, but like they're
Mm.
crazy stories, crazy, like people from like the worst parts of where you could be.
Mm, well, that's Vegas
And
for you.
yeah, Vegas, like Vegas stories. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The hedonism. Well, we were talking about the what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas saying that used to be popular years ago, right? It's like, no, that's not, because the world's connected. You can have an experience and not take it with you. That's not possible. So that's interesting, 'cause that to me in my framing sounds like crisis of faith people plus crisis of meaning people, both sort of together. And then there you are doing the excellent work, by the way, I must say, of being hospitable and showing them hospitality and engaging them in etiquette and politeness and manners and all of that. And because you notice the deficit there, which I think is wonderful. Like you've noticed a deficit and you're trying to sort of address it.
hmm Well, also I have a nice apartment that I'm living in, and there's a deficit there as well. I need some people here.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting aspect. We didn't really discuss that, but just the fact that, and especially, I mean, not so much in Europe, although maybe more so in your part of Europe. Uh, yeah, some of the quote flats in Europe, I'm like, you live here? Like, because in the United States, there's so much land. Everyone's got a big house. I mean, even my little house is big by comparison to the UK. It's like this is luxurious in UK land. I'm like, this is a nice tiny house. Thank goodness. Right. But um that having a house and not having people over to enjoy it. And for me, it's not really the house, it's the yard, right? A huge yard. And I've got this wonderful pole shed that's outdoors, but it's shaded and the rain doesn't get there, right? And it's big, it's huge, right? It's I forget how many square feet it is, but it's like 450 square feet or 490 square feet. It's pretty big. Like, it's about the size of a flat in the UK. Uh, but like I've got this wonderful outdoor space. I've got a grill there. I've got a desk there. I've got the table there. Right. There's a little table where I do the book clubs from actually, when I can do them outside. And yeah, we want to get people over to enjoy that with us because otherwise it's just us and the pond and and the wildlife and everything. And so it's nice to have people over to share your space with every once in a while, especially if you have a nice big enough space. So yeah, it's a good point. I didn't really think of that. We didn't sort of cover that in the talk, but yeah, just being in a space with somebody, as opposed to what we have now in the U.S. in particular, we have a lot of restaurants, and they sort of host, right? They're the the hospitality enabling the meeting. RJ and I met at a restaurant, for example, right? But I was in DC, being hosted, by Father Eric, basically, right? And so that was a very different interaction, and that enabled me to go down and meet RJ at the restaurant in DC, right? And so that was, that level of hospitality enabled more hospitality to be sort of generated, even though that hospitality was, let's say, divorced from a living space, which is where it would normally be, right? It's not my city, it's not his city, right? Because it's a big city, right? Nobody owns it, right? He's not the mayor, right? I don't even know if he's living, quote, in DC at the time. So having a place to host people in your home, we didn't really go over that. So I'm glad you jumped in. This is excellent.
And the reality is that a lot of people don't have that kind of space to share with people. That's,
Right.
in a
Right.
good location that is, well, just good from the sense of like accessible to people, because it's close to my church actually. So we came here
Oh.
after church. So that was really convenient for everyone. And so that's part of it. And not everyone has that kind of space, or at least, a table that 6 or 7 people can sit around. And so
Mhm.
if I
Mhm.
have that, then what am I doing if I'm not having people over?
Right. No, that's great. Yeah, and it's sort of incumbent upon you as the person with the space and with the convenient space and with the large table and with, we'll say, the capability or the ability, um, to facilitate this communion with other people to do so. Because if you don't, and you're the person that can, then who ultimately will. And I think we've sort of lost that sense of duty towards that higher thing, that third thing, the thing above you, which is the communion, or it could be said to be the uh, the ability to bind, right? The ability to host, the ability to find, or to the ability to enable the potential connections in the future, right? If you don't enable that, if you're not able to help manifest the potential, who will, right? So that's the duty. Like, you have the capability, you have the ability, right? You're in a position where this can happen. If you don't do it, who's going to do it?
Yeah. Yeah, and I've seen a lot of this, and I've seen people who have the capability to host and they don't do it, and then I've had to ask myself, why don't they? And maybe there's a legitimate reason for that, but that is a question that raises itself
Yes.
to
Right.
some extent.
It's right. You're right. I mean, that's really an important point, right? Like there are questions that arise as the result of the world you observe around you. There are judgments in place that happen as the result of the world around you. They're not imposed by other people, right? They're inherent in the nature, in the environment, in the conditions that you find yourself in. They're inherent parts of observation. All observation implies a judgment. There's a judgment of what to observe. That's the relevance realization problem, roughly speaking. It's a little more complicated, but it's also that, right? The problem of attention, right? Like, well, the problem of attention is a problem of judgment, right? What do you pay attention to? When you paid attention to something bad, like Vegas, do you get the hell out of there? I was only there for 3 days, but and then I went literally into a canyon. So stayed in canyons in Arizona. And then I only came back to Vegas to take a flight out. So that was car rental place, 2 buses, airport, flight home. It was a long day. Let me tell you, it was a long day, Gustav. Get home at 9:40 at night or something goofy. Not get home, get to North Carolina, and then drive home. Get home at midnight 30 or so. It was a long day. It was worth it.
With that many exchanges, you're lucky to get home at all. Honestly,
that's true. Yeah, it was just the car rental place. I thought it would. This is a cheap way to rent a car. No, there's 2 shuttles instead of 1. I had to make all kinds of. We had to get up early because I didn't know how long it was going to take to get back to the airport. The drive was bad enough, right? It was like a 5-hour drive, 6-hour drive, something goofy like that, straight through. But yeah, and you had to get the flight in the afternoon local time, but then you lose 3 hours flying back. There was a lot. I don't regret any of it, but also next time I'm just going to rent from one of the big car rental companies. Then I only take 1 shuttle to get back to the airport instead of 2. So yeah, the place was way on the outskirts of town and wasn't very hospitable. Let me put it that way. But yeah, I mean that was part of the framing early on was this idea that hospitality has become an industry, right? It was a profession.
Yeah.
And now there's an industry around that profession, and then it's been taken away from the hospitals and given to entertainment and hedonism in the form of Las Vegas.
So, what do you think about this idea that let's put it, that like the rise of communism or sort of these communistic ideas arise out of, let's say, like the people above in the hierarchy not being hospitable towards those below properly, and so that kind of leads to these feelings of resentment and so on that are kind of maybe justified, maybe maybe that doesn't really matter that much. But this idea, I think Peugeot also talks about this, about how the king is the one that gives the gold, and then the liege lords are the ones that give or not the liege lords, but those kind of below, the ones submitted, that they provide kind of troops and loyalty and protection. And so if you break that exchange, which is asymmetrical and so on, but if the king no longer hosts feasts in his castle, then what does that mean? Like maybe it's justified to actually kind of take him down.
Right. Well, to that, I have to say this is where the latent Marxism in academia has never gone away. This, desire to redeem Marxism in some fashion, or say Karl Marx had a point. He didn't. He was 3 years old. I mean that technically. People, I say this and I know people don't get it. If you listen to 3, 4, 5-year-old children, they will quote Karl Marx. Obviously, none of them have read Karl Marx. What does that tell you about the writings of Karl Marx? Any 4-year-old can come up with these ideas. That's very important to understand, right? Yeah. The problem with even Peugeot saying that, and I love Peugeot, and he can almost do no wrong in my eyes because he's French Canadian. We're obviously part of God's chosen people. He and I are definitely, and his brother are definitely proof of that, along with JP Marceau. If you need more evidence, I can't. There's no more evidence available in the world. But also, like, he's way like he seems to think there's some redeeming quality to postmodernism, and I can tell you, absolute certainty there isn't. There isn't one single thing, right, that isn't either obvious about postmodernism that they corrupt or redeemable about what they say. None, zero. It's non-existent. It's fantasy. The problem is that we have not lived in a time where the king was not beheaded. So you can talk about that all day long, but you have to go all the way back to actual medieval times before you could understand that relationship. And so that's too many generations back for us to understand that. And so to some extent, and this culminates in the French Revolution, where it becomes obvious that we have been trying to restore that relationship that you described. And that has, as Ixnon points out, Marxism is about resentment, not injustice. Right? So if you frame your feelings of resentment as justified by injustice, right, because injustice would justify your resentment, that's what it would do, then you run into problems. I think that first off, there is an asymmetrical relationship. Right? It's the flattening of the world that people like Karl Marx do, and that the postmoderns do. Like, the postmodern worldview is horizontal. It's totally horizontal. It's completely flat. That's part of the reason why it's irredeemable. It's completely flat. There's nothing about hierarchy, right? Or the only way it expresses hierarchy is as power. The definition of power to the postmodern seems to be something like force or threat of force, which is ridiculous. See my video on power, on navigating patterns. Thank you very much. It's one of my early videos, also excellent. And so you get a warped view of the world when you think of it that way. But also, you can't think about the world. Like, what are you doing? The world is so much bigger than you. The idea that you have a world view is valid and invalid at the same time. You have a view of the world, and that would be your world view. Fair, but also it's not a world view. It's a view of the world. It's only a world view to you as a person. It's not a world view to anyone else ever, under any circumstances, right? Because every person has a different perspective on the world. Now, they may be similar enough that it doesn't matter, and then you get together in a mob and you kill everybody, because that's what mobs tend to do. Don't do that, right? Like, don't. That's where the ideology becomes dangerous, when you share it with too many people. Ideology shouldn't be shared, right? Because they're your ideas of the world, and they have to be wrong because you're too small to understand much of the world, or at least enough of the world. And that's the problem. We need this hierarchy because different people need to be looking at different layers of the world and understanding those layers of the world in the way that they do, by ignoring all the other layers simultaneously. And my justification for this.
Am I right in thinking that, so a consequence of this is that it's kind of impossible to judge whether the guy above you should be hosting you?
That's right.
For lunch. Yeah.
That's right. But I want to give my justification for this. Okay. I'll give you my justification. You ready? It's called Plato's Republic. That's what Plato says. Sorry. Read the book again if you didn't get it from that.
I don't read books.
It's a good idea. Excellent. Don't read books. Burn them all. Forget it, except maybe one. But yeah, I mean, that's that, and only accept, because oral tradition all the way, baby. It's much more personable and hospitable to tell somebody a story. Speaking of hospitality. Yeah. I mean, and what works on YouTube? Personal stories. Not my channel. My channel sucks. Uh, I know this, by the way. It's very deliberate strategy too, incidentally. I play at many levels. No, but in Plato's Republic, he talks about the different layers. Right? This is like the misunderstanding of Plato's Cave that I have a video about on navigating patterns that I love, that hasn't been watched enough for sure. Like he talks about this. That's what the allegory of the cave is about. If you read all of chapter 7 and not just the allegory of the cave, which you misread anyway, because he says a bunch of things like, you can't do any of this. Can't free yourself from the cave. You're not supposed to. If you did, it would be painful. Not if you did. If somebody did that to you, it would be painful. You wouldn't like it. And then you would want to go back. You would try to go back, and they would try to kill you. Is this like, none of this is a good story, a good allegory. It's an allegory of something you shouldn't want to do, much less try to do, much less do. I don't know why we've got this reversed, but we do. And then if you read the end of book 7, you'll figure out why it's important, right? Because the end is you're supposed to drag the philosopher class away from philosophizing, away from going towards the good, to be jeered at by the people they're trying to help at the bottom of the city, because they see things differently that the people at the bottom of the city don't see. So you're supposed to do that despite not being liked for it. That's the lesson that Plato's trying to give you, is that the city has many layers, guys. Everybody's operating at their layer. It's really important that everybody operates at their layer, but also the top layers are going to do things to the bottom layers to make the bottom layers better and be completely unappreciated for it, and in fact hated for it, even though it will make things better. And it does immediately, in some cases, make things better. I think we've lost that asymmetrical relationship. We want to be known for like our accomplishments or something. And then when the people at the bottom want to be known for their accomplishments, they end up in Gaia worship, in some bizarre earth worship ritual called climate change, where you're ridiculously, quote, recycling things in bins when it doesn't work. What you're trying to do is making everything worse, by the way. Don't do that, actually. Right? Reuse. Yes, I'm a big reuse guy, not a big recycle guy. Don't recycle. That's stupid. Except for tin, aluminum, and glass, and certain types of large metals. Everything else is not recyclable. I hate to break it to you. Cardboard, not recyclable. Plastic, not recyclable. Sorry. And that's part of the problem, is that we mix these things up. I don't think it's the loss of hospitality. I think the loss of hospitality happened later, right? Because I see hospitality, politeness, manners, etiquette existing all the way into the 1970s and 1980s. And that's when it starts to break down, right? Like they used to have a newspaper column called Mrs. Manners. I don't think that exists anymore, or to the extent that it does, it's been spread out. And so there's no unifying authoritative source for etiquette in the United States anymore that I'm aware of. And I used to see it all the time. The English king was beheaded when? So it looks backwards to me. It looks like despite losing the king, we still had things like hospitality from the people who, like yourself, are able to provide it for others until very, very, very recently. And so to me, it can't be that. You could say it's downstream from that, and I wouldn't have a way to disagree. It might be. But I would say it's more a result of the flattening the equality doctrine, things like that, that if we're all equal, there's no reason to be hospitable to others. They're equally capable to you. And therefore, right, and if we're not looking up, if we're living in the flat, equal world, what good would a hospitality ritual be? What are you looking up at? What? There's no potential there. It's just Gustavs plus Mark equals Gustavs plus Mark, whatever that is. There's no sum of parts being greater than the whole. And so why would you ritualize and revere it and hold it as important enough for you to give more of your stuff to somebody than you would give to yourself in the same instance? because that's what
Yeah,
hospitality is.
and plus, if I can host them, they can host me, and they're not hosting me, those bastards. So I'm not going to host them.
Right.
Like,
This is the problem of equality doctrine. Equality doctrine puts you straight into opponent processing because of the principle you just outlined, which is, why would I do this for them if they're not going to do this for me? And it's like, well, because you're capable and you revere the potential of the communion that can happen when you're hospitable. And then, and that's the whole trick. Like, it's not that, it's the third thing that's higher than you. Like, the whole point of hospitality is you're looking towards the future, towards a potential that you could have in common. Hopefully, you're looking at a common thing to get there, right? And RJ brought this up earlier. There's a raising up. You're supposed to both pay attention to the same thing. And the ritual we were talking about, the pre-meal ritual that I partook with my friend. That is the point. Having the ritual of hospitality is the point of there's a potential there. We don't know what it is. We don't even know if it'll manifest. Maybe this will all be, quote, a waste. Well, I can't think of it in those terms because I just can't. But like, maybe it'll be a waste. It won't manifest anything at all ever. That's possible, right? But hopefully, it will. Over time, it will. And if that happens, that's why you have the ritual. A ritual doesn't guarantee a result. It just invites one. And I think we've lost that sense too, because we flatten time. Everything just happens or doesn't. It's all, RJ was using the word transactional earlier. I think it's dead on. Right? We're very transactional, very much like if this, then that. That's that linear and discrete behavior I talk about in the knowledge engine model. If you haven't seen those videos, I have one live stream and one recorded. They're both good, although the recorded one has an error in it around opponent processing. It should be cooperative processing on that slide, but I screwed up because I got sucked into. We all get, and that's the thing. We're all in the age of gnosis. We're all sucked into this framing. It's very hard to get out of. Even I can't do it reliably. And it's good that you're hosting things, that you're being hospitable, and that you're exemplifying that, for our audience and for the people near you, more importantly, because that's where it matters, right? And it sounds like you don't really have any expectation around that, other than it's the right thing to do.
Pretty much.
And
like,
those are people you care for.
I wanna have girls over as well, like for me and for my friends, to get to know them, and so it's a good format actually, and one that works because there is no expectation.
Right.
That's good.
Right. Yeah. Well, the hospitality has knock-on effects, right? Because you get known as somebody who's hospitable. You get known as somebody who has the resources to be hospitable, and that changes how other people interact with you, and opens up the possibilities. Like, oh, this person has more resources than they require, so they're well off in some sense. They're able to handle more than they're handling today. Well, that's prime material for somebody to come in and infiltrate, if you will, your life, and help you to be a better person, right? So
And I need help. I need help because today I was setting all this up, and it was hell. It was hell. I had to go to the shops. I had to buy food. I had to cook it and like figure out the timing, and then I had to take a shower, and it was not working. It's too much. It's too much for me.
Yeah,
I can't do it.
it's always a lot. Yeah, preparing for parties and stuff is always a lot. Yeah, I was talking about my cousin and his Sunday football thing, and all the food. You wouldn't believe all the food. It was constant food. There was just constant food coming out. I was like, "What are you guys doing? This is great!" Like, I was happy. Like, I should sit there and get offered food. That was my whole task, right? I didn't even have to cheer for the stupid game or anything. I mean, I actually like the game, but yeah, and we've sort of turned these hospitality rituals in the U.S. down to sports, which is kind of, it's better than nothing though. So I'll take it. But like, there is a sense in which it's been flattened down to sports, or religion has been replaced by sports rather explicitly in the U.S. But this idea of just hosting a dinner party or being hospitable to the people in your church or whatever, And explicitly, and I know you pretty well, like, and you did do it explicitly, like, no, I understand there's a gap here, that something needs to be exemplified, and that I'm the guy who can do it because of the resources I have access to, even if it's a little overwhelming for me, and hopefully next time you'll have some help, right? And so I need to do this, like, as a duty, because you're a very duty oriented person, right? You're younger, you're looking for duty effectively, right? You're not an ortho bro, thank goodness. And so you're able to enact this idea of doing something for the people around you that is a struggle for you. And I think we're sort of struggling back to that position where people realize we need the struggle, right? And hopefully they're going to aim it not at themselves. This is my grand critique, if you will, of those little cults, right? This stupid TLC thing is very much go off and start your own thing. And it's like, no, that is wrong. That is actually wrong. Go out and be hospitable and help others. That's what you need to do. Use your skills and magnify them by cooperating with other people instead of opposing everybody by starting another YouTube channel that nobody can watch because you already have too much content, right? Like, make somebody else's content better, right? Which is what RJ graciously agreed to do earlier today, which started this particular live stream, which you've done in the past with me, which you jumped in on this. Very hospitable of you. Like, I'm providing the hospitality of the channel, and actually the StreamYard isn't mine. That's a hospitality being provided to me, right? So that I can be hospitable to others and they can be hospitable to me in return effectively. And that enables a much better exploration of a topic like hospitality, which I'm now able to talk about because my experience. I went over that in the beginning. I hadn't been to Vegas yet. I had all these suspicions. I've been wanting to talk about this for decades. Like, what is the role of Vegas with respect to the loss of hospitality from hospitals into entertainment and hedonism? That this is not a new thought for me. This is something that's been going on for 20 years plus in my head. Now I can do it. Why? I didn't dare do it before because I hadn't been there. Needed to go there first. Now I feel qualified to talk about it publicly. I've probably done some private conversations, but never public ones. So that hospitality that they afforded let me see what hospitality was to them. By the way, I had cold toast. It's not a good look, Vegas. Not a good look. Cold toast. Come on. This and expensive is all get-go meal. My good. You charged me how much money and gave me cold toast? Are you kidding me right now? And what did I get? Did I get warm toast, Gustav? No, I got money off the bill. Very transactional. You wouldn't have done that to me, right? If I were at your house?
I would not have done that to you. And also, like, how expensive was toast that you feel like toast was expensive? That must have been quite expensive.
They took $6 off the bill.
For toast. No way.
Yeah.
I should start a toast business in Vegas.
You should.
Guaranteed
You should start a
warm
toast
toast.
business in Vegas.
Yeah.
That alone, you could make a fortune. What? And that was the other thing. So we were sort of talking about this a little bit, but I didn't really get into it. But there's an old strip and a new strip. The old strip was built by mobsters who made a lot less total money, we'll say, but made more than enough. And so really what they actually did care about giving people a good time. Like, that was actually their goal for the most part. And then the corporations come in and build the new strip. And they don't care about that at all. They care about maximizing profits. And it shows, like, you can tell there's a different vibe in the old strip and the new strip. But also, the thing I sort of didn't really go into with RJ so much is everything there now costs money. So in the past, the food was cheaper and the shows were free, basically. So a lot of the shows that you would go to, you just have to get tickets to, or the cost was nominal. It was like $5 or something. And I think the reason why everything costs money now there, where it didn't before, was there's too many people. And so you need to use money as a barrier to keep people away because you just don't have enough seats anymore, whereas you used to. So in the old days, when it was much smaller and was much more exclusive club, You got better care, you got better service, right? Because service is a function of care, and you got a better interaction, a more personable interaction, a more hospitable environment, specifically because it was smaller. And then the food in Vegas 20 years ago was famous for being dirt cheap and really good. And for the most part, the food was actually really good. Surprising. We're in the middle of a desert. How's the food so good? How are you shipping the stuff in and making it fresh? That's great. So food was actually quite good, especially you're up high too. I don't know if you know this. The reason why airline food tastes bad is because it's dry in the airplane and you're up high and your sense of smell and taste is actually off because
That
of
makes
that.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It turns out food in Denver doesn't taste good either because it's so high up. But food in Vegas is fantastic. They know what they're doing there, even though it's pretty high up. I mean, it's 4,000 feet or something above sea level, something in that range. Um, and it's a desert. So it's really dry, but there's plenty of water everywhere, plenty of fountains. Um,
Hmm.
that that change is, I don't think it's a direct change. I don't think it's like, oh, we want to squeeze money out of Vegas. I actually think it's too many people going to Vegas and we need a filter. And money is a good filter to make sure too many people don't suck up the resources that aren't there. Right?
Well, yeah, like also maybe you just got to go to the low money Vegas. Like,
Well, we did. We stayed in the old strip with the cheap hotel, the Golden Nugget, which is a famous hotel. It's one of the few standing old hotels. It's where Wynn bought that early on, and now he's got a hotel empire. Right, he built the Wynn Casino and the Encore and all these. That's where all the money is. It's all the money people go to Wynn. We didn't even go into the Wynn. I was like, I'm not even worthy of looking upon this building. Thank you very much. I'm very poor. That's where the Hollywood stars, all the super billionaires go. But I didn't even really talk about that. But like, yeah, it used to, a lot of stuff was hospitality based, so it was free. The shows were free, right? Or very cheap. The food was super cheap. But now it's not. I mean, they used to have all these buffets. I think there's one buffet left in downtown Vegas. One. There used to be like 10. And they were all
I
excellent.
think I've heard of Vegas buffets. Like,
Right. And you're in Europe. So
I'm yeah.
have you been to the US ever?
Yeah, I went to New York. This was just before lockdown hit. I was there for Christmas with my family for like a week. I
Oh,
think
okay.
this was just when COVID was, it was actually already kind of, whatever. It was spreading, like it was everywhere, but nobody knew it yet. It was like 2021, I think. It was I didn't like it, and I would not go to New York again. It was uh I got accosted by various people and got called a bunch of bad names on the street,
Really?
and lots of rats everywhere, and
Yeah.
the Met Museum was nice. That was nice. That was probably the nicest thing. And
That's the Dutch gone
uh,
wild, New York.
uh and the construction was a disappointment. But it was nice to have gone. There was no place to sit down though. And
There's a ton of
yeah,
museums. There's a ton of little museums in New York City that, well, uh, I saw Gutenberg Bible in New York City. That was pretty cool. Yeah, I've always wanted to see that. I saw one. Yeah, that was the Rockefeller Museum. But there's the Roosevelt Museum too. That was pretty cool. There's a bunch of little museums that are like houses, old houses from the late 1800s, early 1900s in New York City. That stuff is cool. But yeah, I mean, New York City is just the Dutch gone wild. It's New York, LA, and London are all just unique places on the planet.
yeah,
Probably
yeah.
should be
I
engaged with.
The nicest place that I really remember and I enjoyed was the Botanic Gardens, because it's that was in my phase of when I was doing botany and when I was doing plants, and I wanted to visit all the biggest the biggest botanic gardens in the world, and New York is one of them, and they have a lot of
Oh,
really cool stuff. And it's a really nice place. It's a good one, and they put a lot of work into it. And I didn't see many workers around, which means that they've done everything quite efficiently. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and New York to me was not a very hospitable place the times that I've been to New York City. You know, aside from the fact that I'm from Boston, although I pretend I'm from New York when I'm there, because unlike Boston, if you go to New York and they know you're from Boston, they will beat you up. That has happened. In Boston, if you're from New York, they're probably not even going to beat you up, but maybe they should. I don't know. Different live stream. But yeah, New York, I've never found very hospitable. But Vegas was it was all right. I wasn't super impressed. Um, but I knew I wouldn't be. Like I would. This is hedonism and entertainment. I'm not a big fan of either. So I wasn't even there, right? I think you've heard this, right? I've said it before. I wasn't there for Vegas. We were visiting family, and I figured out I could go to Vegas, and it would be cheaper flights, and so it just made the cost of Vegas 3 days in Vegas a lot cheaper. That's all it really did. It didn't, and then I got to visit the stuff I cared about, which was, you know, drawings and carvings on walls made by people 1200 years ago or older, right? So that was the thrill for me, being in the Southwest and seeing, having the Bonanza theme song going through my head the whole time, and thinking about the Rifleman and stuff like Chuck Connors is the Rifleman, and all these TV shows that I remember watching reruns of when I was younger, that my uncle still watches, right? um, so yeah, that for me was more interesting. And the hospitality I got with the family was much better, actually, than I got in Vegas, because it was family, and you can't transport hospitality into commerce. Like, it just doesn't. It's not the same thing anymore because it doesn't
Yeah,
have the
yeah,
same
yeah,
purpose.
yeah, yeah. I had this similar, I guess not similar experience, but when when I went to Georgia, so this is the country Georgia in the Caucasus
Mm.
of Burn Powers fame. Uh, in the last, I think it's like 15 years, they have got so they have a population of 2 million. They went from like 500,000 tourists per year, and now it's 8 million. So on a population of 2 million,
Wow.
they have 8 million tourists going through it, and they've really changed. So this is what I heard from a Latvian guy who's lived there and done business there, and he's a friend of the country. Yeah, he said they've really changed. That they start viewing tourists as money bags, and start like the scammers start popping up, and people just aren't
Mm.
hospitable. Whereas they used to actually, if you get lost, well, in the mountains they probably still do this, but people used to just take you in and take care of you, give you food, you know, all the little quirks of hospitality that people can give you when they don't have that much to give. Just basic food and whatever they can do with their hands and a place to sleep. Uh, but that doesn't happen that much anymore.
Well, that's interesting. It's good. I'm glad we have you here, because one of the themes we were talking about earlier was, um, how is hospitality accomplished in the past, and yeah, I mean what you're talking about, because you're part of Europe that actually hasn't been, we'll say, super affected or as affected by, say, the plague that hit the UK and France and Germany and the Netherlands and places like that. So when you think about hospitality as a European and you're a part of Europe, what do you think of? Uh, how do you interact with it? I mean, you gave us a little flavor, but say more if you can.
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is when you go on some sort of hike in the countryside in the summertime, especially when I was a school kid or something. You would just, if you're thirsty or hungry, then well, we would, as a class or as a group of friends, just go into what do you call it, like a homestead or a farm, and there's an orchard, and they just say, just eat all the apples you want. And so we go and eat all the apples we want, and then they go to the well and they bring out some lovely, the freshest water in existence, and they bring a big bucket of that out. It's all very rudimentary, and they bring out cups, and we just have that water, and it's the most amazing thing ever. That's the the first thing that comes to mind. Kind of the second thing that comes to mind is a sort of different kind of hospitality, which is more like stories that I've heard from my grandparents and from my parents as well, I suppose, sort of about how society was in old times, about how people dealt with difficult individuals, uh, sort of despite also not having that much to give. So just living situations like that, like maids used to be a big thing, which was actually a method of hospitality for during that big leap of urbanization that happened. Maids were basically all girls from the countryside who just came to the big city and they didn't have anywhere to go. And so
Right.
you would kind of take them in and they would do the things that they knew how to do, which was cook and clean. And that's what you know from the countryside, that exapts to this, well, not exactly exapts, but it
Yep.
transposes to the city. And that's a method of hospitality, I think, because it's like
Mm.
maids are expensive, and as a maid you actually don't get to be a maid for very long because you just have to get married at some point, because
Right.
you aren't going to be, you're living in a closet in someone else's apartment or house, which is fine, because you just moved to the big city. But yeah.
That's a really good point. Yeah, in the past, those jobs that everybody thinks were oppressive or whatever were very much hospitality jobs, because the the people with the means were being hospitable to the people without the means to enable them a bunch of potential in the city. Yeah, and with very few exceptions, although there are notable exceptions. Like there were servants, and they were in some cases paid or quote indentured, which the way we think about indentured nowadays is wrong, but whatever. Different live stream. Uh, and so how do you think hospitality has changed? We'll say from what you've seen. You already mentioned sort of the fake news virus scam incident, but we'll say excluding that, we'll say before that, have you seen a change in hospitality? With where you are.
I I would say yes, but I think I think I think the broader climate that I'm in, like the friends that I went to school with and the church that I'm in, actually has a very, very healthy culture of hospitality. Like the people that I'm around do. I think
Mhm.
specifically in my family and so on, not so much. So I'm sort
Mm.
of emerging out of that, and I see the contrast there. But it's difficult for me to see, first of all, my family, then my immediate community, and then the broader society. I can't really see further beyond to broader society. I would say that. I I can't say.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I think that's probably why this idea that we'll say hospitality is less dead in Europe in general is probably why the problems of Europe have sort of come up a lot quicker, we'll say, than they have in the US, even though everybody sort of projects the US is going to break apart. US is fine. Listen to Sargon of Akkad's video. US is fine. Everybody here is pretty positive, except for the crazy leftists that are all going to destroy themselves in a civil war by their own admission. Let them be. Let them do it. Um, Europe is like, oh, we're not fine at all. At least parts of Europe are like, oh, this is bad, right? And I mean, I think to some extent that's what the problem in Ukraine is. I mean, rather explicitly, like we don't want these Western virus to enter Russia, and therefore, we need that buffer zone. Kind of on his side on that, actually. I'm like, yes, you should make sure that you're not transitioning kids uh, ever. And if we are, then you should protect yourself from us because we are the enemy. That 100% true. Sorry, you don't want our media. Like, no, the past 20 years of our media has gone downhill so much. It's horrifying. Yeah, you should protect yourself from Western influence at any cost. I agree. And we're generating a lot of it, although I would argue that actually Europe's generating, or we should say, Western Europe's generating a lot of that, and then we're picking it up and amplifying it. That sort of buffers you against the evils of materialism or something. The fact that you still have that hospitality to some degree, and maybe the infestation we were talking about this as a war, like more on the spiritual warfare side, we'll say, that attack has just happened differently over there, right? So you talk about the tourists for Georgia, it's like that's a different form of attack of a culture where you're destroying the hospitality of the Georgians by having too many tourists. And then they get a flood of tourists. It's overwhelming. It changes their culture. That's not good for them. I'd start a war over that too. Sorry, but I'm all in. I'm a yes on the war in that case, on the more physical war. Absolutely. Like that's dangerous. You don't want to lose things like hospitality because that is where the potential manifests. Hospitality is the methodology or the ritual of manifesting the potential of communion.
Yeah. And it's the famous hospitality that draws the tourism to a large extent.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
They don't raise prices that much, and they're very generous, and they're friendly to pretty much everyone. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's awful to hear. I'm just no wonder why they're fighting a war. Go. Fight. Win. Sorry. It is what it is. Don't want any of that. I think it's bad. I think it's bad for society to be reducing things to money. However that's happening, like whoever's fault it is, you've got to have a bulwark against that nonsense. Because I mean, Vegas is this weird anomaly, right? Because it's in the desert. There shouldn't be anything there, much less water and electricity. And they're just using unbelievable amounts of power because the Hoover Dam's right down the street. It has way too much power because no one lives there. Like I drove around the place. There ain't no one. Hundreds of miles. Right? It's just little oasis cities in the desert.
And it makes sense that because it's a dam, that they're generating energy at nighttime as well, like full power. So you got to put that nighttime energy somewhere.
That's right. You should see the lights. The lights are unbelievable.
Yeah.
It's insane. Some of they've got like, I think it might even be bigger than a quarter mile of this thing over the road. Right? Oh yeah. And it's covered in LEDs on the inside and just 24/7 showing stuff.
Did you see the orb? The big
sphere.
The big orb?
Oh yeah, we saw the sphere. Yeah. Yeah. Well, the thing I'm talking about that hangs over the road, that's to compete with the new strip because that's in the old strip and where we were. Yeah, so it's called Fremont Street. So if you look up pictures of Fremont Street, I have pictures. I'll share them on the Discord at some point. But like Fremont Street's ridiculous. They have zip lines above the road, and people are just walking there. I mean, mostly it's not cars anymore. I think it's closed to cars, but like it was a 4-lane highway at one point, or 4-lane road, and now it's covered with this, with this covering that's lined with LED lights and just showing like TV type media, especially at night. At night, Fremont Street was insane. It was insane. They had guys in dancing gorilla suits dancing to DJ music, and why I don't know. They had flamingo girls just kind of hanging out. They had like the Coyote Ugly women dressed and dancing on bars, and I was like, they had other worse things there too, but yeah, they had this weird trend where they were playing like house and dance music, and guys were just sitting like this, not moving at all, not even blinking. And I'm like, what is the purpose of dance music that you're not dancing? What is going on? And they had a Michael Jackson impersonator on Fremont Street. I was just like, this is completely. And there was no hospitality. That was just like, what hedonism thing did you want to engage with? How did you want to be occupied? How do you want to have your attention torn away from you? And we're just walking down this street, and I'm like, Sarah, why did you take me here? And she's like, sort of laughing. I mean, we were going to dinner, but we had to see it. Like you have to go see it. Like you have to experience. I did want to experience this stuff, right? We did go like through the Venetian in the new strip, and experience to go to the walkway to see the Sphere from a distance, and not a very great distance, but yeah, wow. And I went to see Penn and Teller, which I've always wanted to do, so that was fantastic. But for the most part, yeah, the idea of hospitality, there's just a different, they use the term hospitality, but I do not think that word means what you think it means. Right? It was a very strange experience.
Did you talk about any of the stories? I think there was like a Greek story about hospitality. Was it like wasn't there like a Cyclops or something that had the bed, right?
RJ basically said all the Greek stories are about hospitality. That's basically what he said. I was like, yeah, I guess most of them are. And back then, I think hospitality was more important. And traveling was rare, but hosting people from your village was more common. And just, like it's fractal layers, right? So hosting your neighbors is a form of hospitality. It's a quote lower form. Well, it's the wrong way to talk about it because it's not hierarchical in that way. It's hierarchical in the scaling way. It's not hierarchical in the importance way. And then there's hosting people that we'll say are from out of town or something, right? And then there's hosting people that from out of town versus strangers from out of town. And again, it's hierarchical, but it's not in importance. It's equal importance. It's practicality works funny. But then there's the idea of hosting somebody that has no other place to be. Right. Like, and how do you facilitate that? So like your story with the maids in the city, like they have no other place to be. What are you going to do with them? You can't let them like stay and leech off you. So you give them the tasks that they can do that we'll say, that are universally valuable or something, which I like the way you talked about that. I thought that was really important. But yeah, I mean, a lot of the Greek stuff is violations of hospitality or violations of rules. I mean, this is why the Trojan War is such a confusing story at some level, because it's a violation of the rules to use the wooden horse. Right. It's this Greek treachery over Roman honor. Whereas the Romans send an envoy to Carthage at one point, and Carthage says, you go back to Rome and you give them these terms. And the guy says, nah, I'm not doing it. He's like, we're going to kill you. And he's like, yeah, but I'm not doing it. And they kill him. And he's like, he died with honor. Like, we still know about him. It's like, what? But like, that's important because maybe that's not, we'll say hospitality per se, but it's tied up in the similar ideas of hospitality. Like, what do you do with the stranger? What do you do with the visitor? What do you do with family? When they visit you, we'll say, what is the interaction of visitation? What is the purpose of visitation? What is the telos? And if the telos is that third thing that's higher than you, that potential that can manifest as a result of cooperation, right, with your family, with your friends, with strangers, then it's good. And hospitality is the word that we have for facilitating that sort of cooperation or potential cooperation.
Have you stayed in a lot of backpacker hostels? Because they seem to be quite hospitable, actually. Like they're crazy places with crazy people.
Yeah.
But they charge next to nothing. They offer you a place to stay.
Yeah.
But yeah, they are
it.
full of crazy people. And also the people who run them are also crazy people, by the way.
Usually they're outliers. I have only stayed at one hostel ever in Canada, and I'm never doing that again. Ever. I'm done. Maybe I'll do one in Europe, but no. No. Bruce, we're being hospitable to Bruce. How you doing, sir?
Hey, what's up? How's it going?
You're a little low, but what's up is we're talking about hospitality. I don't know how much of this you've watched, so.
I'm sorry I missed it, but it's a topic near and dear to my heart. But it is, I did not see the rest of it, so maybe I'm coming in a little behind the curve, you know?
You are coming in 2 hours and 50 minutes in.
No, I saw that, yeah.
That's okay. Yeah, we were, Gustav's gave a great sort of description of what was going on in Georgia, the country, and how tourism affected, quote, hospitality there. And my whole theme was my visit to Vegas and how hospitality as a profession and then subsequently as an industry has maybe taken away from hospitals or hostels, which is where the word comes from, is basically being kind to strangers or something, hosting strangers. And maybe that's part of the flattening of the world and the destruction of society as such.
Yeah, so the flattening of the world is somehow hospitality means kindness to strangers, or xenophilia, which would be like love of strangers.
No, that's filled the void left by hospitality.
I see what you mean. Okay.
Hospitality is now a service industry, right? Where it's like what the hell is a service? What are you even like? What are you talking about? You're a lunatic. Like I'm not saying we don't have like a service-based economy in the U.S. or anything like that. Like I understand the economic framing of it. And I don't think the economic framing is incorrect or anything. I just think it's dumb and unhelpful and really harmful to the world because it is a flattening.
Right.
And then what fills in for that, I think, is we don't know how to we don't even know how to discuss immigration anymore. It's been flattened to It's been flat, right? And somebody's taken advantage of that and said, well, immigration, and I'm like, okay, but you're talking about immigration as though legal immigration and illegal immigration are the same thing.
Right.
And they're not, which is why there's a modifier in front of the word immigration. And we're complaining about illegal immigration, and you keep dropping the illegal to try and trick us into thinking that we're talking about something good when we're talking about something explicitly bad by the language we're using, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you're going, well, we need to abolish the word illegal. What? This is all the result of not understanding hospitality, is my argument. Because in the past, you wouldn't have had that discussion. It's a ridiculous discussion to have. Right? People migrated, and you figured out what to do with them, right? And hospitality now means, from the immigration perspective in the U.S., hospitality now means give them welfare and free stuff, because they're here. And oh, by the way, because they can't have legal jobs, well, why not? Because we've lost hospitality. Because Gustav was talking about this. Like he was saying, maid service, where he is, and probably still to this day to some extent, because he's in a part of Europe that is, we'll say, unaffected by the Western European diseases. Although we could blame the U.S., but I'd still want to blame Western Europe. What was all about people coming from the country to the city and not having a place to stay. And then the only thing they have to offer is cleaning, because that's kind of a universal thing, right? That people have, like, you know how to clean because you're from the country, from the city. Cleaning is not that much different, right? And so we've lost that. So we don't say have that for the people that we used to have it for, right? We've made special things, we'll say, in law, right? So we have these immigration work visas, right? Immigrant work visas, which are a very specific thing, which is why, people always say, well, without the immigrants, you wouldn't be able to harvest your food. Yeah. They aren't immigrants. They're actually migrant workers that have visas. They wouldn't be affected by a change in illegal immigration at all. They're not affected, actually. So that's a lie. It's good to know that that's a lie, by the way, because it's a lie. Knowing when people are lying to you is important. But like the whole discussion around that, to your excellent point, Bruce, I like that everybody who comes in brings a new perspective. The whole reason why we're having that discussion is because we don't know what hospitality is anymore. Yeah. And we've reduced everything to law. And now we have a legal and illegal immigration discussion. We don't even understand the hospitality of migrant workers, which we have.
It is funny too, because there's always this sort of soothsaying or assumption of intentions that I think gets brought up in the discussion far too often, which is like, oh, we can't call what the servant workers might be doing as hospitable because they're not doing this out of the goodness of their own heart. And so hospitality has to come from some place of true, authentic action, right?
Right.
But
Right.
but you can't know the actions of the individual outside of what they're actually doing. And so
Right.
how then can a person not use their gifts of hospitality, be bestowed by them, by Creator, or who however they acquired them,
Right.
for a job and still be hospitable, right?
Right.
To me, that's a big that's this sort of like lie of authenticity that seems to be pervasive. Maybe in the West, I don't know about the East, in Eastern Europe, but here it seems like we're constantly concerned with, is this person really doing the thing? Like, really? How do we
Right.
know that? How
Right.
can we assess this and call it hospitality and not, let's say, compelled service or something like that?
No, that's a really good point. Yeah. So sort of what I was talking about with hospitality is this idea of it's a ritual that is designed to facilitate a potential cooperation,
Mm-hmm.
right, towards a higher goal, right? And so you're looking up, like explicitly, in many
Yeah.
of these hospitality rituals,
Sure.
you're actually looking at the same thing, and that thing is higher.
Sure.
Like Bruce Dodds, what do you think about what Bruce was saying there? Because it seemed like you nodded in.
Yeah, I guess that's true about the whole intentions thing, but I think there's a lot of cultural things wrapped up in this for us specifically because we don't get to host many people from outside our culture, and Latvians are a tribe. Like the best word to use for it is a tribe, and we do things differently within the tribe and outside the tribe,
Sure.
so that really changes things a lot.
Well,
We're all
yeah.
basically, like I wouldn't say we're all second cousins or something, but it does feel like it sometimes.
Yeah, so there's sort of an assumption that people are in the same tribe there to some degree, right? If you're Latvian,
Yeah, and
or if you live there.
not exactly, and not only that, but even if you do go over to someone places for like tea or coffee or something, there's both an inherent understanding that the relationship doesn't go that deep in the end sometimes.
Oh.
So it's like sometimes it's like this funny game that you kind of play out with each other, and it's totally fine. But at the end of the day, you know that it's time to leave, and they know that it's your time to leave, and so everything's fine.
So are you officially in the EU?
Yes,
Okay, but you're not in the Schengen zone or whatever nonsense
we are.
it is.
We are. We are. We
Oh,
are.
you are? Oh, okay.
We
Oh,
are.
I didn't think it extended that far.
No, it
Yeah.
does. It does.
Because that came up during the fake news virus scam. Was like, right? Like that was a big division in the quote EU. All of a sudden there were two EUs again. And yeah, but you haven't maintained that sort of strive for equality. You're like, no, we're tribe Latvia. Go away.
Yeah, well, some people want to change that, but it's just not gonna it's not gonna happen, and it's not up to me. It's not up to me. I'm fine saying that, and saying that also my personal opinion doesn't matter in this. It's just not gonna happen.
Right.
Latvians are a tribe, and we've been through too much. It's not gonna change.
Good. I hope that continues. Actually, yeah. That's been the big problem is this equality, this humanism, right? This idea that everyone's kind of equal and it doesn't really matter. And it's like, no, it matters a lot. And I think the problem is what people don't realize is that having separate cultures is important. Like we can't do without it. That's part of a hierarchy, a much larger hierarchy. The hierarchy is much deeper than people realize. I think that's the main problem. Self-similar fractal nature of reality is much more fractal than you realize. There's many more parts. There's many more pieces to it. And I know, for example, Bruce knows a lot about hospitality because when I was in the area, he was hospitable enough to give me a place to stay for the night, right? And also he has this event that he holds on Thursdays, this sort
Happening
of
soon, yeah.
ecumenical event where he allows people into a space that he has to have these, we'll say, difficult discussions. He's been doing it for years. He's done it in multiple places in the U.S., which is why hopefully he'll give me his valuable insight on my community book at some point. I think I added you to that, did I? I hope so.
I think you're going to. I need to look if you shared it with me. But
I
yes.
thought I did, but if I didn't, let me know. I'll definitely add you because we're getting close. My editor is very close. Yeah, I mean it's this. Bruce in particular, he does hospitality all the time, basically, like all the time in various different ways for strangers, basically for total strangers. And I think that that's sort of a dying art, if you will, or something in the U.S. And I think sort of the sort of things that some people are pointing to, particularly in like those little cults, but also all over the internet, are attempts to regain hospitality, especially regain it on the through the means of the internet. And I know we talked a little bit earlier about the hospitality of me, hosting this, right? The hospitality of RJ, agreeing to do it because he was the first one, right? The hospitality of Gustav's jumping in, but also the hospitality that I've gotten because the StreamYard account is not mine, right? It's very important. All these hospitality that's going on enables a wonderful conversation that, as I mentioned earlier, I couldn't have this exploration of this topic without all of you, even though I've been thinking for at least 20 years about the impact of Vegas. And it's not even that I didn't have a platform. I had to go to Vegas first. Now I can talk about this idea that I had about the movement of hospitality conceptually. And then, like I said, it causes this vacancy. And now we seem to be trying to fill that vacancy, whether it be in the immigration talk or with ecumenical sort of talks that Bruce has, or this nonsensical sorcery circling thing that's called estuary, which is just basically circling, only with churches nearby or something. It's the thing has to exist. It's going to remanifest. But if we're not caring for it, if we're not taking it on as a thing that we do, like Gustav's did with this house party earlier, then it's not going to manifest well. It's going to manifest poorly. It's not going to manifest towards the good. It's going to manifest towards the bad on average. On average, it won't be 100%.
Yeah, in fact, it is a qualification for teachers, elders, and otherwise as far as churches and scripture is concerned. Like I said earlier, philoxenia, lover of stranger, lover of others, being hospitable, pursuing hospitality is a fruit of the Spirit and a qualification for someone who ought be teaching. Because how can you teach without being hospitable? I don't know how it's possible. Right. Quite honestly, we've kind of lost that, right, with this intellectualism. Propositions only with no hospitality or something like that. I could read a book to do that. I could, you know what I mean? I could just read something without someone being hospitable enough to teach the thing. And it's a requirement for probably for greater good as far as I'm concerned, but to greater fault for those who employ such individuals without that, right? They're missing out on this. And I'm not saying if you're hospitable, you can teach, but I am saying that if you're a good teacher, you're hospitable.
That's interesting. So you're kind of linking there the loss of the proper orientation or proper aim of hospitality, the proper understanding of conceptualization of it, to the destruction of education as such, or we'll call it the paucity or the lack of proper education. I hadn't thought of it that way, Bruce. This is why we do these things. That's a really interesting take. But I think you're right. Like if you're not, like if the university just becomes a machine for for money making or whatever, which very much has, that's going to come out in the next recorded video that I'm going to release, which I was going to release today, but instead I got to do this, which was better. We'll talk about that there too, because that's very much what some people have pointed out, not just Peterson. He's not the only one that's noticed. He doesn't talk about it that way either. But this idea that this can be enabled, and I think sort of the idea that Joey, who actually founded BOM, and that's the house that he built, among many other houses. He started this Jordan Peterson meetup group that's very much an hospitality sort of a thing, and the sort of hospitality thing that's super important to have in the society that we've lost. But and again, I think we've lost that because we've also lost politeness and manners and etiquette, those are all stepping stones to hospitality. And without that, or by denigrating that, which some people have done rather recently, by calling it a midwit take, none of those people are rise to midwit. By the way, they're all well below that, which is the problem. They think they're above midwit, and they're very much below it. They don't understand what they're denigrating. If they don't understand what you're losing by not having that step of politeness is a step to being hospitable. You can't be hospitable, and I think you're right, Bruce. Like, you need to be hospitable for certain things. I mean, I think probably the call is to be hospitable no matter what, right? Whether you're a teacher or not. But you certainly can't have hospitality if you don't have things like etiquette, if you're not polite, if you don't have manners, like all of that procedural stuff, because that is the procedural stuff. Hospitality can't be proceduralized, I would argue. That's the Las Vegas problem. But manners and etiquette is very procedural at some level. But that's important, because without that, you can't step up to a higher interaction. You can't enable that potential of the interaction between you and other people manifesting in something wonderful, right? That's what I think.
Yeah, it would seem to me.
I think,
go ahead, Gustav. Go ahead.
No, it's just that's the experience that I've had and that I've seen among other people, exactly in the interaction that I described before about getting tea with people. It's like that interaction doesn't work out for some real reason, which is that people, myself or some other people, just aren't going to be compatible, like as friends or whatever. But we still go through with the interaction.
Yeah, manners, politeness, etiquette, those sorts of things do not have to come from a place of authenticity than in a hospitable place, right? This is a learned behavior that is expected from folks, whereas it seems. Yeah, but now you have hyper individualism in the U.S. And authenticity. Like, actually, I was listening to Rogan earlier talking to Dave Smith, and they were like, "Isn't it fascinating how so many politicians and professionals and media figures just curse all the time now?" Like, just all the time. And they were like, well, they took a different take, right? They're like, well, they're just trying to up their game because Trump is so, boisterous and off the cuff, and they're just trying to do the same because they knew they couldn't beat him by holding up manners or politeness as the standard. But that's a real indication, I think, of where that's gone, right? And so you have no politeness or etiquette requirements that would lead to hospitality, right? The etiquette requirements we have now are authenticity, but that doesn't lead to hospitality necessarily, and it's also not necessarily authentic. It's performative. Right. And so how do you teach somebody to be hospitable or maybe to work with the hospitable gift they have, if not teach them etiquette? And if etiquette is you just need to say what you feel, regardless of the parties, and be bold about it. Well, where's the hospitality then? How can you have that? You just cannot. You can't die to yourself. You can't do something for the other person's true good, not just for your own selfish good, but for their true good. If you're not hospitable or exercising these sorts of etiquette and polite, niceties. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with what you call faking it, right? That authenticity thing is a big problem. People want authenticity, and somehow brash stupidity, which I would call it stupid to just fly off the cuff all the time, is somehow a virtue.
Right. Yeah, and it's weird too, right? Because YouTube and TikTok and those places, like, they thrive on people being, quote, authentic, which causes them to be performative in actions like swearing or surprise or anger or whatever. And I refuse to engage in such things. But yeah, this idea of authenticity is trying to rediscover what we've lost from flattening the world, from reducing everything down, because before we had the stepping stone of politeness, which is one thing. So Jonathan Peugeot said this thing years ago on the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis Discord YouTube channel, which I have a clip of somewhere, but I haven't published it yet. Where basically the gist of what I got out of it, I'm not saying this is what he said, this is the gist of what I got out of it, was he said something like, I don't like practices, which to this day I'm angry at him about. I'll just tell you, that's not going away. Practices are Manuel and I's big thing, guys. He said, I'm not big on practices. It still gets my hackles up and makes me angry. Because they don't give you what church gives you, right? You go to church, sometimes you go to church, you're going to be with a bunch of people that you don't like, and sometimes you don't want to go, but you go anyway. And for me, I was like, wow. Basically what you're saying is that this is training for being around people you don't want to be around and doing something you don't want to do, but doing it anyway and figuring out basically how to get along with people you don't agree with when you're being your most disagreeable, we'll say. And I was like, what a frame. He's never said it since that I know of, which
Absolutely
is really
the case.
upsetting.
Yeah, I don't remember who said this. Someone, it's with regards to church things like that. You have to love them, but you don't have to like them.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Well, we've been. I think there, Bruce. I mentioned this earlier. I think when you use the word love, I think there is a good example of what you mean is care. You have to care about them, but you don't have to like them, or you have to care for them, but you don't have to like them.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's one of the equivocations that Vervicki talks about, but doesn't take, we'll say, seriously enough. Is that a lot of people use the word love and they mean care. That's exactly what they mean. And hospitality is all about caring. It's not caring about the other person. It's also caring about the other person. It's caring about the potential that could manifest by being polite, interacting with them, and being hospitable. That's the thing that allows the manifestation. So, for example, I meet Bruce online. I actually end up going to his crazy Thursday thing, which, honestly, I've told you this before, a little uncomfortable because I was a little bit of a celebrity, and I was like, I don't want all these questions. I want to kind of sit back and just interact, but I was just getting bombarded with questions. It was still lovely, right?
Yeah, it's a wrestling match sometimes. Yeah,
sometimes. And then I got to spend the night at your house, which you were gracious enough to open up to me, so that I could continue my journey up north, right? So, you knew I was leaving in the morning, right? Like, I got to get on the road. I got to get up to where I'm going. I'm only halfway there, which is unusual. I usually try to do 2/3 of the journey in the first day. So I have an easier day the second day. But, and that was a big deal, right? I remember you said, like, oh, no, we only do it on Thursday. And I'm like, no, you need to do it on Wednesday, because I don't like to drive into New England on Friday. That's terrible. But I did, right? I made a bunch of compromises, right, so that I could experience your thing. And I got a bunch of hospitality in order to do that. And, that's just enabled a better sort of closer relationship, between the two of us, right? And our ability to severely disagree about a number of very important things. And yet you're still gracious enough to come on and enjoy the hospitality of my live stream.
Right, exactly. Yeah, because there's still care about a person. This is, I mean, to some degree, the Christianity fixes this. I would say it definitely fixes this, not even to some degree, but there's a care about a person in spite of what they do, don't do, or how they act because of their nature. And so that sense is there, and you learn to do that through things like service practice and hospitality and etiquette. And there may be I'm sure in some people's lives where they never get over a problem with a person, but they still do what's right, not for their person's sake, but for the nature that they hold, which is image bearing, God's image on them. So in that sense, you have an obligation, responsibility, as it were, right, to do that. Now, but what happens with that is you tend to grow to like a person at some point, right? Many times you do.
Yeah.
And you learn a lot about yourself too, you know.
Exactly. I do wanna, because I have to eat at some point. I do wanna run some down, but I wanna address Ixon. People try to link quote authenticity to caring, and remove caring from transactions. I think that I don't think Ixon. I don't disagree with you. I think it's the wrong way to talk about it, right? Because we flatten the world to transactions, caring's not an option, and authenticity is the attempt to re-enchant intimacy, right? And the problem is it's very hard to have intimacy or a quality of a relationship in equality, because all relationships need to be equal because we're all equal. And that's the intimacy crisis, is affected to a large degree by this equality doctrine garbage. We're not equal. We're not supposed to be equal. We're not going to be equal. If we were equal, we'd destroy the world. Let's not do that, please. I like this. Or removing caring from procedures. Yeah, I mean, if you don't have a hierarchy in the world, then procedures are either the only thing you have and the only thing you need, or they shouldn't be there at all, and everything should be like, this poetically highly connected, intimate relationship, as you referred to earlier. There's no in between because everything's equal. This is why the flattening of the world, this equality doctrine, does one cause the other? It doesn't really matter at this point. Like, that's not the stream for that. If you want to see that stream, comment below. Great, we'll do one. But that's the danger when you flatten the world, when you go after these equality doctrines, is you end up in this bad place. And that's the problem, is that there's no option for caring. It gets removed automatically because it gets replaced with procedures. And I don't know where Bruce went. That's very sad. Gustavs, I gotta go. So I gotta eat. I'm supposed to be doing something else. So, been doing this for 3 hours plus. And hopefully Bruce will come back to give us his closing thoughts. But what closing thoughts do you have?
I think I gained a little more appreciation for what happened at my place tonight. I think those are my closing thoughts. I'm gonna keep doing it.
That's great. I mean, that's fantastic. That really that actually warms my heart. Thank you. It is wonderful. I wish RJ were here to give closing thoughts too, but I guess Bruce isn't coming back, which is sad. But that's okay. He'll be on other streams, I'm sure. Yeah, we should plan these out better. This is sort of last minute, but it just kind of worked out really well. Yeah, I think that we need to pay better attention to this idea of hospitality. This is one of those things. I don't want to call it a third thing because I'm not using it that way, but also it's one of those higher things. We'll call it a proper abstraction or a proper aim that we've lost in the flattening of the world. The reason why we can't talk about this is because we're living in this flat, equal world. And that's why we're struggling with this concept that's vitally important to our world. And the concept keeps sneaking back in unhealthy and corrupt ways. And I think Las Vegas, for all I did enjoy most of it, for the most part, is a corruption of hospitality. It's this industrialization, this proceduralization of this professionalization of caring. That you can't do that. You can't reduce caring to a bunch of procedures and pay people to be caring in a hotel. It doesn't work. No matter how much money you give them, you can pay caring people, but you can't pay people to care. I've said it many times before, and I think that's what we've lost with this flattening of hospitality. But listen, everybody, I'm glad that you joined, and I hope you got something out of it. Even if you didn't get as much as, we'll say, Gustav's got out of it, and hopefully RJ got something out of it, and Bruce too. I'm sure they did, and hopefully they'll put some comments on after they watch whatever they missed, and I know you will too, Gustav's. And look, I want to do more of these. I'm always just looking for people and time slots that work for people to do them. But if you can come up with those, you can reach out to me on the channel or on the Discord server, Mark of Wisdom, which is pretty much open to everybody. And look, everybody have a great evening. I'm going to go off and have some dinner. And I really appreciate the engagement, and tell all your friends, because I think these are, honestly, navigating patterns is the most important conversations on the internet right now. I'm not just saying that because they're mine. I'm saying that because I'm having them with people who see the importance of them and agree. So not just me, right? Like these are important things to talk about. So tell everybody, let's get everybody on board. Let's try to have more of these conversations. If there's topics you want to bring up, let me know. I'll try to bring them up. Tomorrow is agreement, and that is a lead up to the Matrix video. Jesse and I are on it. We've got the outline. It's ready to come up. And look, everybody take care of each other. Be hospitable to one another. Care for each other. And be better.